Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Brother Vance, tell us the latest prophecy. Surely you have seen more by now. The man before me was a wiry, tall creature with hair that seemed to be trying to run from the center of his head as though it might escape from some impending disaster. His eyes were a shade of blue that made ice seem warm, and there was a dullness to his appraisal that told me his thoughts were simple and dark. He dressed in black slacks and a black shirt that showed off his clerical collar, lest anyone forget that he was an ordained priest. He called himself Father Icarus, for he intended to lead us all into the light. Perhaps there had been a time when he was a good man, but that time was gone before I knew him, burned away by his continued attempts to climb into the sun. All that was left was obsession and a steadfast belief that he was in possession of the key to true salvation. He believed I was to be that key, but the truth was that there was no salvation to find. I saw the future. More precisely, the future was spoken to me, whispered in my ear at night while I tried to sleep. The voice of prophecy was like the tone of an old dial phone played across the bones of a washboard made of glass reeds. It rattled the teeth in my skull and stuck like hooks in my cavities, sending sparks of hot wire pain directly into my brain. I wanted to beg it not to speak to me, but it seemed to find pleasure in my pleas, and I had long since given up hope of relief. This was the voice of salvation that Father Icarus so believed in. This was the gift they all sought from me, though they hardly understood that it was no gift at all. At first I had stolen positive things from these nightly horrors. I could turn my back to the blackness of the world if only I could find the silver lining at its edge, and not everything whispered into my ear was poison. I prophesied storms and was always right. I told my peers where to plant their farms to avoid terrible floods. I predicted births down to the exact hour and prophesied the rise and fall of political figures. Father Icarus always loved to hear my predictions, and none more so than the one he considered the true sign of my power. I pulled from the ether the winning numbers of the largest lottery in our state's history, and the church reaped the benefits of my prediction. Surely then, my powers were good and just. Surely the source of such great fortune couldn't be evil. The things I kept to myself were the things that showed the true nature of the voice. I told no one about the rise of dark cults across the world. I shared no secrets about the babies born with black eyes and razored teeth that cut their own way from the womb. I wouldn't have known where to start talking about the doorways opening to strange places that let stranger things crawl into our universe. How could I begin to explain that other groups, just like ours, were popping up all over the world, and that their good intentions were turning into twisted nightmares? The flock didn't know that I had heard these things as well. They didn't know that the voice of prophecy had told me that the world was ending and that a time of suffering without end was coming. I had been quiet for days, unable to see light in the darkness of my nightly horrors. The worst of the prophecies were all that remained, repeated nightly like a madman's favorite album. Father Icarus was growing impatient. After all, my lack of prophecy made him look bad. It made his flock begin to doubt, or so he claimed. The truth was that the Father's flock had already accepted him as a newly born savior. I had no idea what he would have to do to chase them away, but it wouldn't be as easy as not giving them a new prophecy for a few days. "Surely the Lord has given you another premonition, son," he pressed me. He had been pushing me for days, and so in anger I gave him what he wanted. What gift does he have for us true believers? His nagging had grown to be too much. If it was prophecy he wanted, then it was prophecy I would give him. A great darkness is coming, and it is hungry and eternal, the end of all things to have begun. You will know it's coming by the messenger, a man who speaks for the unspeakable. He will herald the time of madness. The words were etched into my brain and repeating them was easy. Father Icarus's expression faltered, darkened. I thought for a moment that he was going to yell, rant, or rave at me and demand I give him something less dark. But then he smiled. His expression was like the breaking of a storm, but the light that shone through the dark wasn't a pleasant one. There was no hope in this silver lining. "I'm not lying," I said cautiously. "I know you're not, my boy." He seemed honestly pleased, and this I found even more disturbing. "This is the kind of prophecy that we've been waiting for since you were first discovered. Can't you see our congregation has lived through the times of light? But what really draws people together is tragedy, hardship. These tribulations that you predict, they are a divine test. We will only grow stronger together, brother." I opened my mouth to protest, but the fervor in the man's eyes was enough to tell me that he wasn't going to listen. Not really. I slipped away as he began his preparations for the end times. I needed to leave this place behind. I'd yet to get a premonition that directly related to Father Icarus and his followers, but I could sense the change in atmosphere. Something bad was coming, and the longer I stayed where I was, the closer it became. The real problem was finding any place that was safe. Where would I go? "There are other worlds beyond this one. You only need a key." The voice crackled into my skull, and I stumbled mid-step, barely catching myself on a nearby railing. "What key?" I was talking to myself, but there was no one around to hear me. "Go forth, and I will lead you. This world is already dead, but you can travel to others. Find the key. Steal the van." "I can't just steal the van. People will notice. They'll come looking for me." The words, with their sudden direction, were making my heart beat fast in my chest. Normally, there were no directions. Normally, there was only descriptions of things that were happening or going to happen. This time, the voice seemed to be actually talking directly to me, and I didn't appreciate its notice. "Steal the van, Brother Vance. Escape the darkness." Minutes later, I was in the driver's seat of the compound's van. It was a new vehicle, one purchased with the lottery winnings, but it was still a large van, and so it wasn't exactly meant for fast, stealthy escapes. I had never driven it myself. In fact, I'd only driven a few times in my life, and it had been a much smaller car. I caught myself trying to look in every direction at once and forced my eyes to focus on the task before me. The morning was still dark. No one would be out to check on the van. I reached up and flipped down the visor. The key fell down in front of me and I picked it up. It was so easy. Surely if they cared that much about the van, they would have made more of an effort of keeping the keys in a safe place. It was pretty much a sign. Telling myself this allowed me to build enough nerve to put the keys in the ignition and turn the car on. The engine roared to life, filling the air with what seemed like far too much sound. I was committed at that point. There was no going back now that my escape vehicle was running. The door to the compound slammed open and someone stepped out into the early morning dark. "Who's in there?" a voice yelled. I shifted the van into reverse and slammed on the gas pedal. The vehicle responded with much more enthusiasm than I expected, and a moment later I was tearing my way down the dirt road that led away from the place that I had spent most of my youth. I was finally going to be free. The odds were good that they would come looking for me before long, but they'd be hesitant to use the police. Not all of the things that happened in Paradise City were entirely legal, though Father Icarus assured us that they were legal in the eyes of God, which I took to mean that they were legal in the eyes of Father Icarus, and that would have to be good enough. Still, it was several hours before I stopped checking the rearview mirror every few seconds for an indication that I was being followed. Freedom, however, was to be short-lived. It was only a few moments after I had stopped checking the mirrors that the voice spoke to me again. "Left, Vance." It was a simple direction, and I had no plan as to where I would go next, so the direction of the voice was as good as any. Still, listening to it made me feel like I'd given up one abusive overlord for another. Father Icarus was an evil man, and it could be hard to tell at first, but the voice that spoke the prophecies into my head wasn't evil. Evil wasn't a word that could be applied to the kind of darkness the voice represented. If chaos was a natural energy, then that is what the voice would represent. But even knowing that, I followed the directions it gave me. It was either that or be truly alone. And I feared being alone most of all. We drove far off of the main roads until we were on dirt paths climbing heavily wooded hills. At times, things became so bad I wasn't sure that the van would pull through, but it always managed. We traveled for more than 5 hours, but finally we came to the place the voice was leading us. I drove past a heavy steel gate that had been left open. The booth where a guard should have been stationed was empty, the glass broken and the door swinging wide. It was a clear sign that whoever had left this place behind had done so in a hurry. What was this place anyway? It looked like some kind of military installation. I parked my car on the inside of the abandoned gate and walked up to a door cut into the side of the hill. I had seen enough bunkers on television to know what one looked like, and this place was a bunker. The doors were 3 feet thick and sealed by massive turning wheels. Well, they weren't sealed now. The double door was hanging open, a cement tunnel crawling away from the entrance and deeper into the hill. A single line of fluorescent bulbs lit the path. "Where am I?" I asked, not entirely certain what kind of answer I expected to get. "This is a place where dangerous things have been kept, but no longer. The key that you need is inside. Follow my directions closely. Going the wrong way here means that you will die a horrible death." That was enough warning to keep me carefully on the path the voice wanted me to follow, even if the logical part of my thoughts were telling me that just getting away from here was the best thing I could do for my hopes at longevity. Going down into this bunker didn't feel like a good idea. Still, the voice had led me this far, and now I felt as though I was committed to the path it was leading me down. I followed the hallway, ignoring the branches in other directions, until I reached a set of stairs that took me down further into the facility. There were security doors, but they'd all been left open, some clearly intentionally braced open so they wouldn't shut. It looked like a case of sabotage. I turned a corner on the voice's recommendation and heard the sound of distant screams bouncing down the tunnel in my direction. This caused me to hesitate mid-step. Don't slow down if you want to live. Your time is limited. The chill this sent down my back got me moving again quickly. I walked past doors that looked like they'd been pulled from the set of an insane asylum movie. Heavy metal structures with a slot at the top where someone could peer inside. Most of these doors were still shut, but a few of them were open. The voice urged me not to stop and look into the rooms beyond, and so I kept moving. "Stop," it finally said, and I turned to an open door on my right side. "It's in there. Go retrieve the key." I nodded and walked towards the door. It was already partially ajar, and a part of me wondered if there would be anything left in the room at all. Why was a key locked away in a facility like this anyway? I pushed the handle on the door and it swung open. Inside, the room was barren except for a pedestal in the very center. Atop the pedestal sat a small black sack. Or perhaps it was brown, and it was actually quite large. The more I looked at the bag, the less certain I was of anything about it. It seemed to shift as I turned my head, as though I wasn't seeing all of it at once and I couldn't make my eyes bring it into focus. "Is the key in the bag?" I asked. "You will take the bag, put it in your pocket, and we will leave the same way we came, but faster." "So the key is in the bag?" I asked again, stepping forward towards the bag, even though doing so made my stomach flop as though I was getting motion sick. "You are not to open the bag. Just put it into your pocket and leave. Time is running out, Brother Vance." As if to emphasize the voice's words, an unearthly roar echoed down the corridor, cascading off the walls as though searching for the next victim of whatever horror had summoned the sound. I sprang forward on legs that suddenly wanted to shake and grab the bag, shoving it down into my pocket even as a feeling of utter revulsion swept through me, though the revulsion was quickly followed by a strong curiosity. It was an insidious thing, this curiosity, nettling at the back of my mind in an insistent way. It kept asking me if I really wanted to carry a bag whose contents I didn't know. Wouldn't it be better just to give it a single look to make sure it was safe? A quick peek into the bag couldn't hurt. Fortunately, for the time being, I had a far more pressing task to pursue, and that was my escape from this awful place. I ran back through the halls as fast as my legs would take me, and I would have sworn that something terrible was in pursuit. I could feel it at my back, its presence so pressing that I refused to even glance over my shoulder. I knew that if I chanced a single look back, I would be snagged by my pursuer and dragged back into the dark of the tunnels to become just another screaming voice. Somehow I made it back to the van. As I was finally forced to look back the way I had just come, all I saw was an empty doorway. Whatever phantom had chased me through the halls had gone back into the depths, or perhaps had escaped into the world. Either way, I was free to continue my own exodus. I threw the van into reverse and escaped from that place as fast as the little people mover would take me. It didn't feel fast enough. The pall of that nightmare place seemed to stretch far beyond its walls. In fact, even as I rejoined the highway, I could still feel its cold touch upon my skin. This was my second escape of the day, and some part of me knew it was the more dangerous of the two by far. The strange pull of the object in my pocket was just another aspect of that. It clung to my curiosity like a hook caught the gut of an overeager fish. "The end of this place is upon us." The voice of havoc rang through my head. "Then how do we escape it?" I asked, more afraid than I'd ever been before. I didn't want to live in a world that felt as alien as this one now did. "I have the key. How do I get out now?" "The door." The words slipped into my consciousness, bringing them images of an old wood door set in the frame of buildings in what looked like a city alley. If there was something special about the door, I couldn't decipher the fact with just the short vision granted to me, but I knew I wouldn't have to either. The voice was still guiding me, and now I knew where we were going. We traveled on through the night and into the next day. I hadn't slept, and every minute of driving was an agony, a personal fight to stay awake and aware. Before I even knew it, we were pulling off of the interstate and winding our way into the depths of the city. The buildings rose like spires around us, and the angry scream of the traffic kept me alert for this last leg of my journey. Even in this place that was so alien to me, I could sense the change in the world. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, and tempers flared at even the smallest offenses. A man crossing the street against the light was accosted by an angry driver who dragged him to the ground and began beating him savagely as a crowd gathered and cheered him on. I passed a small store where the clerk had drawn a weapon on a kid he had caught stealing a can of soda. Thankfully, I was well past the scene when I heard the telltale bark of weapon fire. A couple caught in a small argument tumbled across the ground, fists flying and hateful words drowning out the laughter of those who had come to watch it all unfold. People were exploding with hate and rage. I moved through them like a man wading into a swift river. I could feel the torrent of madness washing around me, but I kept moving forward. Escape was nearly at hand. I followed the guidance of the voice down a narrow alley and then another that bisected the first, the channels between the buildings becoming so narrow that it felt like I could scarcely walk without turning to one side or the other. Suspicion was beginning to creep into my mind. Perhaps the voice was leading me into some kind of trap. Was I a fool for following it deeper and deeper into dark places? The object in my pocket seemed to throb with intensity. Maybe, just maybe, looking at it would help clarify the situation for me. Just as those thoughts crescendoed into a body-shaking horror that I was certain would undo me, the door appeared before me, exactly as I had seen it in my vision. It looked old. The building into which it was laid seemed brand new by comparison, and the old brick structure had to be a few hundred years old. Why then did the door look like it had been here far longer than the rest of the structure? It looked like it would more appropriately be set into the wall of a castle, or perhaps found amidst ruins buried in the woods for thousands of years. The wood gave the impression that a solid kick might turn the whole thing into a pile of splinters, but when I reached out and touched the portal, it felt as firm beneath my fingers as the bricks into which it was set. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it didn't yield so easily to my grasp. There was no keyhole anywhere on the door that I could see, and the panic started to slip back in. How do I open it? Where does the key go? I tried the handle again, taking it with both hands and trying to force it. Calm, Brother Vance. Place both hands on the door and wait. I did as the voice said, though my hands were shaking as I sat them against the worn wood of the door. I laid my palms flat and waited. The door was cold, as though it had no regard for the relatively warm weather that existed around it. It was cold enough that after a few moments of resting my palms upon it, they started to hurt. I was about to repeat my discomfort so the voice knew what was happening, but as I opened my mouth, I felt a click within the door, as if some unknowable lock had just set its pins. Now, open it now, quickly. I scrambled for the handle, twisting it sharply and pushing at the door. It had to push open because there was no way it could be pulled open in the narrow passage. The door fell wide, and I toppled through it, my stomach swinging freely as I lost balance and cascaded through the opening. I was overcome by a sensation of movement for a moment, as though I'd fallen for much, much further than I could have, and then I was laying on the ground righting myself. I heard the slam of the door behind me, and I turned quickly to see that, indeed, the door had shut itself in my wake. What I didn't understand was how the door was sitting at an angle above me, apparently lodged in the side of an old tree. The frame was exactly how it had been on the other side, but the position was impossible. I could not have stepped through a door in an alley and walked out of a tree and, well, I wasn't certain where the tree was, but a quick look around me told me I was nowhere near a city. Forest spread out around me as far as I could see in any direction. I couldn't even hear a car or an airplane. Wind rippled through the branches of the trees, and I shivered. It was cold in this new place. The trees had cast off their leaves, and the taste of snow was in the air. I was ill-dressed for such weather in my light slacks and short-sleeved t-shirt. "Where am I?" I asked, not yet feeling the relief I had hoped to feel upon passing through the door. This place felt strange, if not as tainted as the one I had left. "So ungrateful, Brother Vance." A voice rose up to my left, and I almost fell over my feet, turning to see who it was. Some terrified part of my mind told me it was going to be Father Icarus, that he had followed me all the way to this new place, and he was going to be furious. But it wasn't the mad father who faced me. It was something far worse. The voice had spoken of this one. He had eyes as black as the space between stars and colder than the ocean in winter. His smile stretched too far in his face, as though his mouth could open his head in half and he might devour a man whole, though he was no bigger than one himself. Still, large though he might not have been, his presence was vast. He was a beacon of maliciousness that flared like black fire where he stood. "We brought you all the way to this new safe place, and all you do is complain that you're cold and the world is strange. That is behavior most unbecoming of a man of your accomplishments." The uncanny man spoke with a voice plump with false sincerity, and one that addressed thoughts I hadn't even given words to. My body shivered, not from the cold, but from facing this nightmare in the flesh. "What accomplishments?" I managed to ask, for I had done nothing but run away. "Why, you've done the most important thing a man can do in service to the worm, Brother Vance. You moved the beacon to a new world." It smiled then, thousands of teeth filling the wretched gap in its face. "You've brought the worm to a new place to feast. As a reward, we will let you watch as this new world is consumed." I shook my head. "No, I was just trying to get away." The dark creature laughed. Our heroes are often born of cowardice. It is fear that lets us inside, that empties out a place for us to take root. And Brother Vance, I promise you that we are rooted in the very fabric of who you are. We chose you to carry our prophecy, and then we chose you to carry the beacon. You were our champion from the very first time you woke up sobbing from one of our visitations, and we have feasted on your misery ever since. We drove you right into the hands of Father Icarus, and now his compound is burning with all of the precious flock tucked away inside. You helped to do that, Vance. You should be proud. Their screams burn brighter than the carbon in their bones. Laughter seemed to echo all around us, rising as if from some damned audience, and it was joined by the sounds of people screaming in heart-wrenching agony. I fell to my knees, shaking in horror. The uncanny man shook his head. Tisk, tisk, Brother Vance. There is no time for sloth. Our master hungers.
A dark place. That's where Jackson McCormick loved to be. Made him feel safe, helped hide his secret. But it wasn't a normal secret, like kissing a girlfriend in a closet or trying to take sexy pictures of himself. No, Jack didn't care for that. What he cared about was smoking a cigarette, which was actually what he was doing. The closet where he was hiding smelled like cigarette smoke, and he coughed hard because of that smoke. Jack sighed softly, thinking about why he'd got to this point. He never wanted to smoke, but everywhere Jack had been or had gone, he saw people smoking, and one day he figured out he should try it for himself. And that's where the problems began. Instead of buying groceries or important stuff, he would buy cigarettes of any kind he could lay his hands on. Just then, the closet door swung open, and Jack's mother, a nice blonde-haired lady, stood there with a dark glare on her face and her arms crossed.
Jackson, what on earth are you doing?
His mother snapped at him. He looked away from his mother. He didn't want to tell her. He knew she already knew. Jackson's mom grabbed him under his arm before taking him out of the closet and marching him into the living room. Then his mother threw him onto the couch, ripped the cigarette from Jack's hand and blew it out.
I thought we agreed you wouldn't do this anymore,
Miss McCormick said, holding up the cigarette. Jack knew he couldn't stop because he had been doing his smoking ever since his dad died. When Jack was 18, his dad died in a car crash, and he felt horrible seeing his mother upset and knowing his dad wouldn't see him grow up anymore.
Jack, you are 21 years old, and you're still freaking smoking. I hate the house smelling like smoke.
Miss McCormick snapped at her son. Well, you shouldn't have let Dad drive the car when he was drunk, Jack shouted at his mother. Miss McCormick gasped at what Jack had said, and even seemed shocked. Jack stood up from the couch and headed out the room. His mother followed him, explaining that she was sorry, but he didn't care. He just shrugged her off, saying that he would be home later. And then he walked out the front door, slamming the door behind himself. It's not my fault. None of this is, Jack mumbled as he walked down the street. He headed to the park. It had a place in his heart, a dark place, because it was where he had had his first cigarette. The day seemed clear in Jack's mind. He and a couple of friends were hanging out at the park when a few broke out a pack of cigarettes. When they asked if Jack wanted one, he said no at first. But after some peer pressure, he took one and started smoking it. The first time he sucked in the smoke, it made him cough, and his friends laughed at him. But after the first one, Jack got used to it, and then all the rest was history. When Jack sat on a bench, he pulled out a pack of cigarettes from his jacket pocket. Shit, he hissed when he realized the pack was empty. He then remembered he had used the last one in the closet. So instead, he just decided to sit on the bench and let the outdoor noises fill his ears. Maybe his life would be better if he wasn't alive. Maybe his mom would be happier if Jack had died along with his dad. A few hours later, Jack stood up and decided to head home. But first, he wanted to stop by the store and grab another pack. As he was walking, Jack suddenly stopped and looked up. He noticed he was standing in front of a small grocery store. Without another word, Jack walked into the store and looked around. It was dusty and old-looking inside. Jack noticed spiderwebs in the corners, and then Jack thought he saw a rat run past his feet. When he got to the front counter, he noticed no one was there, but Jack noticed a silver bell sitting there. "Hello?" Jack shouted out loud. No one answered, so Jack hit the bell, ringing it. He waited. Then an older man appeared from nowhere.
Welcome to Supernatural Stuff. I'm your wonderful shopkeeper, Mr. Knight. How may I help you, young man?
The man asked, grinning. Jack didn't say anything. He was just looking at the man. He had black and gray hair, one eye completely white, and he was wearing all black. Do you have any cigarettes?" Jack asked nervously.
Yes, I do.
Mr. Knight replied with a smile. A few seconds later, Mr. Knight placed a pack of cigarettes in front of Jack, which the young man picked up. The box was white and gold, and then Jack noticed in black bold letters the words, "Pleasure," on the front of the box, right in the middle.
Do you like them?
Mr. Knight asked in a mysterious voice. Jack just nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, ready to pay the man.
Oh no, young man. They are free of charge. Just think of it as a gift from me to you.
Mr. Knight said, holding up his hands. "I don't have to pay you?" Jack asked, confused.
No, you don't, young man. But I would wait until you got home to use them.
Mr. Knight said. Jack nodded before looking down to put the cigarettes in his pocket. And then when he looked up, Mr. Knight was gone. Huh? Where did he go? Jack mumbled under his breath. But he didn't think about it and then headed home, thinking about what had happened in the store. When he got home, he heard talking and laughing and growled under his breath. His mom's friends were over, probably chatting and drinking tea like they always did. So he headed to his room, where he shut the door behind himself and sat on the edge of his bed. Jack pulled out the strange cigarettes, looking at them, wondering what Mr. Knight meant by what he said. Jack opened the pack and pulled out the cigarette. He noticed it looked like a normal one, which confused him. He lit the cigarette and started smoking it. When Jack blew the smoke out of his mouth, he noticed it was black. Huh? Jack mumbled. Jack coughed hard, rolled his eyes, and then started smoking it. And a minute later, he was done. Jack sighed softly, thinking about going downstairs to see his mom's friends, but he didn't want them to smell smoke on him. Jack then felt tired. He looked up. His brain felt like it was going numb, and he looked at the pack that was sitting next to him on the bed. "I need another one," Jack said without emotion in his voice. When Jack blinked, he jumped off his bed, breathing heavily. The box of cigarettes was laying all over the ground. He placed a hand on his chest and noticed that he felt like a zombie for a short time, which worried him. There was a knock on his bedroom door, and Jack gasped before picking up the cigarettes.
Honey, are you doing okay?
He heard his mom ask him. Jack didn't say anything after picking up the box and all the cigarettes. He hid them in his sock drawer before his mom could come in. Then he opened the bedroom door and smiled weakly at his mom, who looked worried. Hi, Mom. You okay? Jack asked, smiling again at her.
I came to ask if you were okay. Did you calm down?
Miss McCormick said. Jack nodded and yawned. He felt tired and then rubbed his eyes, wanting to fall asleep.
Honey, are you sure you're doing well? You look really tired.
Miss McCormick asked, sounding concerned. Mom, chill. I'm fine. Maybe I just need to get some shut-eye, and I'll feel better in the morning, Jack explained to his mom. Without another word, Jack shut his bedroom door, kicked his shoes off, and then fell asleep on his bed with his clothes on. A few hours later, Jack bolted upright and looked around, confused at first, then rubbed his eyes. It was dark in his room, and dark outside. He grabbed his phone that was on the nightstand and looked at the time. It was 3 a.m, and Jack was confused, making the phone fall out of his hand. Man, I slept like a log, Jack mumbled under his breath. Then he thought about going downstairs to eat something and getting a glass of water to wash it down his throat. He got out of bed and headed downstairs, noticing his mom was sleeping in her room too. Jack then got into the kitchen with the small overhead light on, turned on the sink faucet, getting him a glass of water.
Jackson?
A voice behind him said. Jack turned around with the glass in his hand. He expected to see his mom standing there, but no one was there. Suddenly, Jack heard something breathing heavily behind him, and he felt confused.
Don't you want another one?
A voice whispered in his ear. Jack jumped out of fear and dropped the glass on the ground, which caused it to shatter. A few seconds later, Jackson heard footsteps, and his mom ran into the room and stopped when she saw the glass all over the floor.
Jackson McCormick, what on earth did you do?
His mom shouted. I don't know. I was just getting a glass of water and then something whispered in my ear. And then I dropped the glass, Jack explained, looking around. The next morning, Jack was sitting on the couch. He had an argument with her about the glass, and then when he had told her what had happened, she didn't believe him. What happened last night? Jack mumbled under his breath while rubbing the back of his neck. Jack heard his mom talking on the phone, probably with one of her friends, and he sighed quietly. Then, without another word, he stood up, headed out of the house, and headed to his spot in the park. He took out the pleasure cigarettes and examined it, attempting to figure out how it worked. Jack started trying to break into it, unroll it, but he stopped. He had the same feeling wash over him the first time he had smoked one of the cigarettes. I can't hurt the product, Jack said in a dazed voice. He looked at his hands and stopped messing with the cigarette. He lit the cigarette up, sticking it in his mouth like he always did. He was smoking, looking at the ground, wondering what had happened to him last night, and he coughed hard again. Jack stopped when he heard laughter. He looked up and noticed a little girl standing in front of him, all black.
Hello, Jackie. Do you want to play with me?
She asked, grinning at him. Jack cut himself off and stared at the girl. Suddenly, the little girl started laughing. At first it was cute, then it started getting darker and more evil. Then the girl coughed and threw up black goo, which was coming out of her mouth and nose. She then lunged at Jack, which caused him to scream in fear, and he fell off the bench and landed on the ground. The girl was on top of him. Her eyes were completely black now. The black liquid was running down her face and out of the corners of her mouth. The black liquid was dripping onto Jack, and some landed on his cheek, which caused him to scream in pain because it was hot.
Only one a day. Remember that.
The girl hissed at him. More black liquid landed on his face, and he cried out in fear, telling the girl to stop and leave him alone. But she just kept laughing darkly. More black liquid hit Jack's face, and he cried out in pain. Then the little girl giggled, and when Jack opened his eyes, the girl was gone. Jack immediately jumped up, dusted himself off, and rubbed his cheek. It hurt, and he knew it hurt. Jack then ran home, and when he got into his house, he leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Jack hoped his mom was still at work, but she walked into the front hall and was wearing an apron, which confused Jack.
Jackson, where did you go?
Miss McCormick looked confused. Jack didn't say anything. He noticed there was flour on his mom's apron, and he tried to cover the burnt part of his cheek.
Oh my God, what happened to your cheek?
Miss McCormick cried out, running over to her son. Jack's mother grabbed Jack by the face and gently touched the burnt area. Jack groaned under his breath, and his mom looked worried. "Mom," Jack said, looking at her. Miss McCormick wasn't listening. She was trying to fix the accident on Jack's cheek. Jack tried to get his mom's attention, but it didn't worry her. She was complaining to him about his accident. "Mom, leave me alone," Jack shouted, shoving his mother away from him.
Jackson, what on earth are you doing?
Miss McCormick asked. "What are you doing? I'm not a baby anymore. Stop treating me like one. I'm fine. I've already told you I'm fine," Jack shouted at her. Jack headed for the stairs, and his mom followed behind him, talking without stopping. "Mom, shut up!" Jack yelled at her so loudly it hurt his throat. Jack then headed to his room and slammed the door before sitting on his bed, and he growled under his breath. Just then, the door was thrown open, and Miss McCormick was standing there with a glare on her face. Before Jack could say anything, she walked over and grabbed him by the ear, which caused him to cry out in shock.
We are going to the doctor, young man, and you aren't going to argue with me or I'm grounding you until you're 30.
Miss McCormick shouted. Then she took Jack outside and shoved him into the car, and Jack noticed his mom somehow didn't have the apron on. "Please, Mom." Jack was cut off when his mom glared at him, and Jack looked away as they were driving. Jack looked out the window, rubbing his burnt cheek. He was trying to think of who that little girl was. Both McCormicks were in the main doctor's office a few minutes later, and Jack rubbed his aching ear. Then he was called back into the checkup area, and his mom told him she would stay back there and listen to the doctor. When he got there, the assistant told Jack to wait in the room until the doctor came, and he nodded. But right when the lady left, Jack got up, ran out of the room, and silently walked down the hall, hoping no one would see him. Jack ran down the hall until he found a door open and ran into the room. He went into the empty checkup room, then he shut the door and sat on the checkup bed. "I can't take this anymore. I just can't," he said, breathing heavily. Then he stuck his hand in his jacket pocket, stopped, and pulled something out of his pocket. Jack opened his hand, and sitting in the palm was a pleasure cigarette. "How the heck? I didn't even have one in my pocket," Jack said in a shocked tone. Jack reached into his other pocket and pulled out the hidden lighter. He knew it was his because it had the baseball picture on the front. "Do it," a voice hissed in his ear. Jack then remembered what the little girl had said, only one a day. He figured it must have meant only one of those strange daily cigarettes. Jack felt weary as he looked at the cigarette. His head started hurting, and he felt like passing out. Suddenly, the door opened, and Jack looked up and saw a doctor standing there, looking at the clipboard. And when she looked up, she saw Jack standing there.
Who are you?
The lady asked Jack. He jumped, and the cigarette flew out of his hand, and then he looked at the lady, not knowing what to say. "Get her," a voice hissed into Jack's ear. Jack suddenly jumped at the doctor, and she screamed out of fear and shock, but Jack covered her mouth and grinned at her. A dark grin crossed his face. "Be quiet. They won't care if you die," Jack said in a dazed voice. Jack took his hand off the lady's mouth and then headed for her neck, starting to choke her.
Please let me go, young man,
the lady said, sounding worried. Just then, the front door busted open, and a few security guards and a different doctor were in the room. Jack looked up at them, and everyone gasped in shock and surprise because Jack's eyes were completely black.
Young man! Stop this nonsense right now!
The other doctor shouted. A few minutes later, Jack was back home in his room, laying on his bed. He felt sick, and that's what the doctor had told his mom. Jack had thrown up twice, and his mom had made him hot tea to calm his throat, but it only made him feel worse. Miss McCormick came into the room to check on her son's temperature and was shocked.
You are burning up. I have no clue what's happening to you. Maybe you're getting a virus, which is why you're acting so strangely.
Miss McCormick explained. Mom, there's something I need to tell you, Jack said, sounding weak.
What is it, honey? Do you feel better?
Miss McCormick asked him. Actually, Jack stopped and grabbed his head in pain. He screamed in pain too, and Miss McCormick gasped and ran over to the side of the bed, telling her son to calm down. Then Jack calmed down, and he actually fell asleep, and his mother kissed him on the forehead and walked away from the room. Then Jack suddenly woke up and jumped up, heading into the bathroom. He felt like he needed to throw up. He got to his toilet, and then he let it out. When he was done, he wiped his mouth. And when he looked down, he gasped. His mess was pure black, like the goo that had come out of the girl's mouth. And then he let it out again. And then something else came out of his mouth. And Jack looked down into the toilet, and his eyes went wide in shock. He pulled a tooth out of the toilet bowl and stood up. He felt inside his mouth and felt the one missing spot where the tooth had come from. What the hell? Jack said, sounding completely terrified. He went into his room and opened his sock drawer. The cigarette box was gone. Jackson looked around and he noticed the cigarette box was on his bed, and he ran over to it, grabbing the box off the bed. When he looked inside, he noticed there was only one left. He was a bit shocked. Jack then grabbed his lighter and had an idea. He headed downstairs and out of the house. He didn't hear his mother shouting his name, and then he stopped at the corner and grabbed the cigarette. One more, he said, grinning darkly. Jack then lit it and sucked the good stuff from the cigarette. And then when he took it out of his mouth, he laughed loudly. But it was a dark laugh coming from Jack's mouth. But he didn't care. It felt too good to stop anything. Then he threw the cigarette and stomped it with his bare foot. He didn't care that it burned his foot. Jack just stood there thinking about something and shoved an empty pack into his pocket. It's time, Jack mumbled under his breath. Jack then noticed a big 18-wheeler heading down the road near where he was. And then, without thinking, Jack walked into the middle of the road and stood there with his back to the truck. Everyone will be happy, Jack said, feeling better about his life and everything else. He heard the horn from the truck, but didn't turn around or do anything else. He just stood there, ready to die. Then Jack blacked out, and he felt his mind and feelings slipping away. He felt the ground beneath him, probably dead or bleeding. Jack groaned under his breath, and when he opened his eyes, he was staring at the ceiling, and the lights were blinding him.
He's awake,
Jack heard someone shout. When Jack opened his eyes, he saw his mother and 2 police officers smiling gently at him. What's going on? Jack asked as he sat up in the hospital bed.
You're lucky to be alive, young man. You apparently walked out into the middle of the street and almost got hit by a truck,
A police officer said.
And then the doctors and EMTs found a box of cigarettes on you.
Miss McCormick said, sounding concerned. Jack told everyone in the room what had happened to him while messing with the pleasure cigarettes.
Well, we actually found out that those cigarettes had an experimental drug in them, and you were the first victim of it,
the other cop explained. A few days later, Jack was out of the hospital, sitting in his house's living room. when he smiled. Jackson actually quit smoking for the first time, and he actually felt happy. And then he looked over and saw his mom reading a book. The doorbell rang, and both McCormicks looked at each other puzzled. Jack got up and headed for the front door, and when he opened the door and looked around, no one was at the door. He then looked down and noticed something on the ground. It was a bottle of wine, and he picked it up. Glamour, the bottle said.
Jack, who was at the door?
Miss McCormick asked. The only sound heard was that of the wine bottle being opened.
Look, Daddy, an airplane! My son Cedric pointed up at the sky at the brilliant metallic dot, cutting a white line across the clear blue. This was something of a family tradition. When I saw airplanes as a little boy, I had to point them out. Now, my youngest took up the mantle. His older brother Colin had long since moved past such foolish, childish things. We wouldn't have seen this one if it hadn't been for the thinning leaves of the trees. We were playing a bit of catch before dinner, and the airplane had glinted at us from behind the bare topmost branches. The ball exchanged hands between my son and I a few more times before he exclaimed, "Daddy, Daddy, I see another one! Another one!" I humored him and shielded my eyes and squinted. The air traffic overhead had increased in seconds. There were indeed 2 more planes, just like the first, rather unusual for the skies over Hayrock Glen. The evening sunlight cast a golden hue to the chemtrails that slowly fanned out and made interesting colors. I was moved to stand and watch along with my son. Those quiet, nondescript moments were what I enjoyed the most about being a father. Those seconds where the world held still just long enough for us to hear the distant bird song, watch the winking lights on the silent aircraft as they glided overhead, and we just existed without the weight of any great care or obligation. That was all about to change. We tossed the ball some more, keeping our eyes on the sky. At one point, we could see 7 high-altitude flyers. When I could see over 11, a funny feeling began to crawl into the back of my head. The feeling got stronger when I saw 1 or 2 of the planes do things I had never seen before. I thought their kind always flew in a straight line. Some of them began to make sharp, erratic curves. Then, some of said aircraft got bigger, which means they were getting nearer, and something was wrong. There were flashes of light visible in the sky. We could have almost mistaken it for lightning had there been any clouds. Pops and bangs began to reach us, the kind that linger for a long time, as if echoing off the horizon in all directions. They were the sounds of war. One of the planes made a spiral with its chemtrail as it went into a tailspin. I instinctively ran for my son, even though the plane still had a lot of falling to do. Its trajectory changed just enough that it missed our yard, but not by much. It had passed by so closely that I could see inside the cockpit. The sound of the impact was deafening. That must have been the cue for all hell to break loose, because other planes spewing their plumes of ice and exhaust shimmered as they came within heart-stopping proximity of our small house, and debris and fire fell like rain. I told my son to go down into the basement with Mommy, who was in the doorway, nearly in hysterics. Me? I was rooted to the spot. I had to see how this would all unfold. One airplane glided so low that our trees touched its undercarriage, and its chemtrail exhaust burned my nostrils and stung my skin. It skidded across the empty field at the bottom of our hill, like a great stone skipping on a pond. The other aircraft became apparent, the kind that were actually meant for acrobatics, American fighter jets. They darted among the slower, larger aircraft like hornets bringing down pigeons. It was in that moment that a detail pierced my senses. The planes that were being shot down had no markings. No numbers, no decals, no nothing. As if they were ghosts. But that was enough for me. I ran inside as another explosion rattled our windows and shook the ground. I joined my wild-eyed wife and our children in the basement, though I suddenly doubted if the basement would provide sufficient shelter from a falling airplane. The minutes crawled by. The din of war faded away. I was still uncertain about the safety of coming upstairs, but I did. I stuck my head outside to see empty skies and smell the oil and burning metal and other harsh aromas of slain aircraft. "Honey, get the news on the television," I called back into the house. Bursts of light from gunfire and explosions bubbled on the horizon, telling me that whatever fight there was, it had moved past us. What had I just witnessed? Had some sort of terrorist attack just been thwarted? As the sky calmed, so had my fears. Though I would find out very soon that my troubles had just begun. Stepping into the house felt like crossing a threshold between insanity and normalcy. Suddenly, in the domestic ambience of the house, where my wife and 2 sons gathered around the television, she looked at me with her great, dark eyes. "What's the news saying about all this, babe?" My wife wrinkled her nose when she saw me. "You smell like you've been dunked in ammonia or something." I was in such a heightened state that I had forgotten about the close encounter with the chemtrails from one of the doomed airplanes. "Yeah, I got sprayed by something. I'll shower in a second." "Is the news giving us anything at all?" "I can't find anything. There's no emergency broadcast or anything." Surely there had to be. Airplanes being shot down over American soil by our own fighter jets. There had to be something any minute. No news outfit worth their salt was going to just let a story opportunity like that just slide off the hook. Or were they? The sky was the last place I had seen anything about what had just happened. I slept uneasily that night. I kept grabbing my phone and looking to see if anything hit the news. The internet was eerily silent, reporting on everything else but the takedown of nondescript aircraft. I thought I would have been too short on sleep to get up with the alarm, but no. I made it just fine. There was that whole need to work for a living. I cursed myself for being a devoted father and husband, like I was. I'd even gotten up early enough to get out the door with a few extra minutes. I was sure the school wouldn't want to pay me any overtime, so I took the time to do a little patrol around the area and see if I could see anything. I remembered the crash in the cornfield that was visible from my own yard. Finding the wounded field had been a cinch. The landscape was bare like the surface of the moon. There was the earth, dug up and upset by the impact of the aircraft and the explosion, but there was no debris and no people, as if the plane that had been shot down evaporated, and nobody thought it worthwhile to regulate rubbernecking. I stood next to the field of blackened cornstalks for a long moment, leaning on the hood of my truck with the door open and the gentle sounds of Kenny Chesney drifting out. Nothing to see here. How convenient. I brushed off the conspiracy theory devil and went to work. Couldn't keep the school waiting. There were wastebaskets to empty from under teachers' desks and from student bathrooms. Not to mention the mop work made for me from the kids just existing. The world, as I knew it, seemed to go on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. It would take several days for it to manifest, the same way it takes autumn leaves a while to fall after turning colors. I hadn't noticed the extra child or 3 that were in the nurse's office. This had happened for a good 4 days in a row before I took notice. Their crying was on the level of a steam whistle. Their faces the color of ripe tomatoes. The volume of traffic to the school nurse never decreased after that. It increased, if anything. I would be pushing a broom across the old tiles and catch a glimpse of the nurse, always looking the same way. Bewildered. One day, I didn't see the school nurse at all. I saw one of the teachers wearing the hapless, helpless expression reserved for the nurse as she looked over the wall-to-wall mass of kids. Then, there weren't any kids, any teachers, or anyone else at the school, and the doors were locked up until further notice. The intense headaches became a town-wide problem, and the small hospital was overwhelmed in less than 3 days. Men, women, and children had such agony locked up in their skulls that the only way they could find relief was through heavy sedation, and there wasn't enough of that stuff to go around. I was out of work with the school locked up, so I was at home full-time with my wife, who couldn't stop screaming. She clawed at her scalp, pressed her palms against her ears, rocked from side to side on the bed, unable to reach some caliper, some vice, some piston deep inside her skull that would not relent. I don't know that I have ever felt so helpless than I did right then. My wife was right there in front of me, locked in a suffering that I couldn't comprehend, and I couldn't do anything for her. I had tried running to the dollar store for some over-the-counter headache relievers, but they were closed in the middle of their business hours. Everyone must have been home with a migraine. I peered in through the windows. Their shelves of meds stood with gaping spaces where all the Tylenol, Advil, aspirin, and similar used to be. I looked around at the landscape, pretty sure I could hear moans in the silence between breezes. My sighs rose in frozen clouds of mist. The air was getting colder by the day. There couldn't have been a worse time of year for things to go south like that. My chest tightened when I looked up at the radio tower. Someone was at the top right, next to the blaring red light that silently pulsed. Red alert, red alert, red alert. I did a swan dive onto the earth below. There was no way that was an accident. I drove over to the twisted body of a teenage boy and called 911. There was no answer. I could barely process anything. I ran in several short directions all around the body, waiting for the solution to enter my brain. There was nobody to get. There was nothing I could do. The boy gazed up with his eyes that were just as blue, just as clear as the sky that met his stare. I couldn't just leave him, but I couldn't do anything for him. My family needed me. I got home and did recon around the house, snatching up and hiding anything that I so much as suspected could be used as a tool for suicide. My wife started repeating over and over, "Kill me. Kill me. Just kill me. I can't stand it. Just kill me." She brought back the body of the boy into my memory, and he started to look more and more like her with each repetition. No sooner had I gotten home and shut the front door than it was drummed with frantic knocking. It was our neighbor, a kindly old gentleman named Frank that always had a greeting when we crossed paths. He was frantic, saying that his wife had lost consciousness and became unresponsive after days of crushing headache. He was trying to get through to emergency services, but nobody was answering the phone. They had to have been glutted with cases. I remembered the nurse's office being wall-to-wall with kids. That's how I picture the Hayrock Glen Clinic. I felt guilty telling Frank that I didn't know what to do. It was the truth, but it wasn't enough. He went inside his house, and we never saw him again. I brought a glass of water to my wife, who had somehow managed to fall asleep. I thought it would be cruel to wake her up. I leaned over her and felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Her eyes were not completely closed. babe?" I prompted. She didn't answer. I gave her a gentle shake. Nothing. Then I gave her gentle slaps on the cheek, called her name with increasing volume. Her head lolled, but it was from my motions, not hers. She had a pulse and shallow breath. That was when time truly started to slow down for me. I kept the television on and tuned to the news. They weren't reporting anything pertinent at all. No mention of the airplanes or the pandemic of migraines that were causing people to pass out or commit suicide. I was just present enough to feed myself and the kids and put them to bed. The rest of me was poised to react to the slightest sign of stirring from my wife. For 3 days, she was out like that. For 3 days, nobody answered the phone at the hospital. 3 days before she would open her eyes and weakly call my name. I almost wished she had kept her eyes closed. Then, I wouldn't have to know just how much worse things were going to get. When things were finally a billowing dumpster fire of a nightmare, the news finally started reporting on what was happening. I guided my wife to the restroom. Her eyes ticked all over as if they would suddenly start seeing. Her one free hand, the one that wasn't holding my hand, trembled as it felt the wall, like the shaking antennae of a cockroach. I didn't want to see her eyes, and yet I couldn't stop looking at them. They were completely clouded over. Circles of gray, adrift in their seas of white. After she was done mourning over the loss of her vision, we got on with helping her whenever she needed to go. She stubbornly tried to remember a few key paths around the house. We spent a lot of time in front of the television together. The plump brunette woman prattled away as if everything had just been learned in the last hour. "The entire United States has gotten a headache, thanks to a pathogen that has researchers baffled as to its origins or its means of distribution. Seemingly overnight, businesses are shutting their doors, and hundreds of breadwinners are going to bed to sleep off a migraine that has broken all records of pain measurement. 9 out of 10 people that succumb to the pathogen and the ensuing migraines will develop complete and total blindness." The camera switched to an aging woman wearing a white lab coat and thin-rimmed glasses. "The inflammation is so intense that the optic nerves are crushed. But there's other data that suggests that the ensuing fever also cooks the retina. So, it's a double tap, you could say, of making sure that the infected lose their sight." They cut back to the reporter. "There are some that are apparently immune to the pathogen, but they are the exception, by far." There was a knock at the door. I was about to go all-out ballistic on whoever was on the other side of that door wanting something at the worst possible time. It was the neighbor from across the street, the one that couldn't see. But he was accompanied by someone that could see, an older Mexican gentleman, Rory Mendez. Calm, you in there?" I pinched both of my temples and opened the door, looking into the blind eyes of Ollie Griffith. "Calm. Rory is trying to sell me something, and I can't tell if he's being straight with me or not." "Oh, for God's sake, Ollie, why not?" "Because I can't see." "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" "Double-check the deal that he's given me. Make sure that he's given me what he says he is, and that he's making the payment we agreed to." I looked into Mr. Mendez's eyes and saw the frustration kindling there. As far as I knew, Rory was an honest man. The two of us that could see guided the one that couldn't back to his own property. Rory steered us toward a small pile of lumber, stacked next to a larger one. "He wants to buy 1/4 of a cord for $50. Now, I need you to make sure I'm giving him 50 and that he's getting 1/4. I gave Ollie a look that I knew he couldn't see. Part of me hoped that he could feel it. I went from being useless to being a critical component of a business deal that had nothing to do with me. I waited for some sign that his conscience might be getting heavy, but nothing. He stood, waiting like any other old man waiting on customer service to clear the runway for his takeoff. All right, Ollie, you indeed have $50 in your hand from Mr. Mendez, and his apportioned wood amounts to 1/4 of a cord if I have ever seen a fourth. Okay, Ollie said, all the pleasantness gone, as if dismissing a genie now that his wish had been granted. Rory and I exchanged looks. How you holding up, Rory? I said with a knowing smirk. He shrugged. I might get some respect now that people can't see I'm Mexican. They both laughed. Our faces of amusement both burned out at the same pace, and the serious, sober glowering draped us. Think we can stay gainfully employed because of these? Rory said, pointing to his eyes. The work will be steady. I don't know about the pay. Rory flashed a grin of white teeth and nodded to the door. I'm not a stingy old shitcomb. You need me? I'm right over there. Well, I appreciate you. He nodded and excused himself. Winter crept in and wouldn't let up. It was like a bad scene from a movie where all the characters are in the trash compactor and the walls just keep closing in to crush them. The cold got colder. The dark skies got darker. And the tension in our little town grew. It didn't bring things to a grinding halt. People still bartered and traded what they could, and I was called upon frequently to oversee such transactions, often when I was in the middle of something. In exchange, I was usually fed, and so was my family. There were no generous smiles to go with these moments. They were matters of necessity, and people would have been glad to hold the lines of their own little bubbles and brandish their consciousness of caste and race and lineage and all else. But no. Now they needed each other, or else they might not survive to see or, experience spring. It took longer for these harsh realities to sink in with some people than others. Father Igor Corbett stood outside the church, hollering away for people to come in for service on Sundays, and any day he got desperate enough to play the part of the holy barker, calling for a special emergency service. I stood and watched him for a little while, the same way a child watches a wounded beetle struggle its way across a hot sidewalk. Children, God is still with you, with us, with Hayrock Glen. Now is the time to walk by faith, not by sight. Come and have your thirsty souls quenched with the good word. I can still show you the way to peace and relief. You can't see, asshole, someone said. Father Corbett's pale face flushed rose for a few seconds, a leftover reaction from when he was more in control of things. The blindness changed that. He went to his usual color, then went pale. Then he began weeping pearly tears under his long, black coat. Nobody was going to come into the church and hand him their money anymore, at least not until they got some firewood or food to go with his sermons. It was almost a cruel joke, the way many people besides myself had snuck past him and were sitting in the sanctuary. We mostly sat with our heads bowed. There were probably 15 or 20. Nobody spoke to one another, partly so as not to alert Father Corbett that there were people enjoying God's presence, free of charge, and partly because many had no awareness of their neighbors, guided inside by a seeing companion. I dared to look around me 1 second too long, and I locked eyes with none other than Ron Simpson. He usually had nothing but smoldering hate for me in his eyes, but this time, his gaze was gentler. Not quite gentle, gentler. They came over and sat close so we could whisper without disturbing the over-eager priest outside. Calm. Good to see you have your sight. Good in most ways. Lots of people ask me to play broker for them. I don't know how they'll manage if I ever go back to work. What? Is the school locked up? You think teachers are going to shepherd a classroom blind? Most of them have a hard time doing it when their eyes are fine. He smirked. How is the family dealing with everything? I knew the question that was draped by those neutral words. He wanted to know how Elaine was, the one girl he almost married, until I came along and stole her heart. Ron was a man that played the field, and always would. I think that's one of the big reasons that she let him go. And he continued to play the field after she was gone. But the question mark that hung above the heads of everyone too bored to do anything interesting with their lives was, what if he would have gone through with it and settled down for one girl? His family isn't friendly to me for this reason. I radiated more commitment than he did. The only person that's gotten the blindness is my wife. Both of my boys are just fine for some reason. This news physically jolted him. He raised his head to slowly look at all the panes of stained glass. Then, he got up and excused himself. I ruffled my eyebrows at him as he carefully exited the church. Sobs were beginning to shake Father Corbett's voice. Suddenly alone, I felt the need to chat with someone else. The plump figure of Bill Dalby was on the opposite side of me. The poor man was cursed with looking like Hitler, if the Fuhrer had eaten 3 square meals a day at McDonald's. He sensed my attention and looked at me with those light gray eyes of his. I almost thought he was blind until I saw his pupils. I scooched down to him. "What do you think, Bill?" I said. He grunted. "Well, I think the government owes us a goddamn explanation. That's what I think. Did you see any of those airplanes our boys were knocking out of the sky?" He answered before I could. "Blank. Spotless as cans of soup. They weren't warplanes. They were commercial. Now let me tell you, my brother over in Omaha watched half a dozen of those things fly over like they had the run of the place. And there's a base less than a mile away. You mean to tell me these things flew all over the U.S. and not one American pilot acted immediately? I don't like the smell of this one, son. That's got dirt of all kinds all over it." And just as Bill's words were about to make my eyes roll, he had me hanging on to every word, assuming everything he said was true. I glanced down at my phone and politely excused myself from Bill, who, as usual, hadn't even begun to get everything he had to say. I passed by the blind Father Corbett, who could no longer speak intelligibly. He just stood and sobbed with his arms outstretched. Wait, was he holding a collection plate this whole time? Really? Not that many would actually see him, I guess. The meek will inherit the earth, not the mewling, I said to myself. New Year's Eve came and went with utter silence. If anyone drank, they did it at home, and I certainly had my share. But I had to be careful. Elaine would never see me sneaking drinks, but I didn't want to upset her radar. That wife radar that women have. It was the only secret I kept from my wife. Sorry, but sometimes a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. Secrets. I wondered if Elaine kept any secrets from me. You get married, and then everything is open, including things that you thought would always be private. Somehow, the other person always ends up finding out. Somebody from your past calls for the first time in 12 years just as your spouse is the only person home. An email from a coworker is discovered that just happens to be perfect for taking out of context. Then it hit me. It's the dead of winter. Everyone is blind. I can go through my wife's phone. One of those things you think when you're hammered. Finding my wife's phone was a breeze. Doing so with muddied coordination was more challenging than I expected. But I got it without making much noise. All of her texts were from months ago. Most of them were from me. One thread was from someone with no name. Just a series of hearts for the first and last name fields. My inebriated brain triple-checked that it was a separate thread from my messages. She had been talking to someone behind my back, using eager, surreptitious words that someone like me was never supposed to discover. I eventually found a message where she called him by name. Ron. He must have found a way to get her attention again. I felt that moment coming on where I bask in the bitterness of the revelation and try to sort out what it was that caused her to seek out greener pastures. Before that could happen, I needed to check something else. I accessed her voicemail. There was one from Ron, dated from the Sunday that I had run into him at church. He was breaking up with her. He told her that he had no interest in caring for a blind woman, and their plans were off. It was terse and cold, just the way I had always figured him. I stood by the doorway to the boys' bedroom for a long while, reviewing mental footage of me and them and her, questioning just how good of a father I really was. If there was something a character like Ron could give them that I couldn't. Nah, he was the type that would set them up with TV dinners and candy and video games each time they would want attention. He couldn't be a father. So what did Elaine see in him that she didn't see in me? Maybe she didn't even think in terms of how her decisions would affect others. Maybe she was more like him than I ever realized. I decided to drink some more. I woke up to pounding on the front door. An officer was out the door who had clear blue eyes. Sorry to bother you, sir, but I've got an official letter for you, for your eyes only. I opened it with shaking hands, and I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. The officer paraphrased the contents, as if he didn't think I could read. It's January 1st, so the local schools are all being turned into assistance and education centers for the visually impaired. You are being mandated by the federal government to serve as an instructor inside the institution and as a broker for business dealings outside. You and your family will never go hungry or cold again. He entered my kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat in it backwards. I looked at the letter, looked to him, gestured to it with one of my hands, and shook my head. He smirked. I need your signature before I leave. Otherwise, I can't leave. I stared at the letter, not seeing the words. Then I saw my wedding ring on my trembling hand. I could have played the desperate, betrayed husband card and refused, just to see if they'd haul me off to prison so that my wife would get nothing. But that would mean the boys would get nothing. Nah, I couldn't do that. I wasn't Ron. When you say I do, you mean it. You commit to forever, no matter how long that ends up being. It was going to be a little longer for me than her from then on, but oh well, I had more to live for than just her. I signed the paper. We stepped out onto my porch and gazed off in the general direction of where the school buses were headed. They were filled to the brim, what with seeing drivers being a commodity. The meek shall inherit the earth, the man mused out loud. I shrugged my shoulders. I've met some really brash people without their eyesight. Well, they'll have to learn to be meek if they want to gain any independence. Right now, all those people needing your help have the system in a lockdown. We need you to help these people stand on their own 2 feet and see with their own 2 hands. I looked through the open window at my wife, who sat, rather symbolically, on the couch in front of the television as she watched the news. Perhaps the people I was going to help would see value in me that she didn't. I would let her hear Ron's message. Eventually.
What do you do with a room full of old, musty suitcases? That was the first question that came to my mind after I had a look through my late uncle's estate. He'd recently passed away, and as his only living relative, his home fell to me by default. To be honest, I knew I wouldn't find much value right from the start. Sure, his old farmstead was prominent, but it was in terrible condition. Most of the furniture was old, and the many tools he'd amassed were rusty and hadn't been touched in years. I found the suitcases filling a storage room at the back of the house. I blinked, shook my head, and then stared at them. What the hell? I knew some people owned multiple suitcases, hell, various sets. This, however, was different. Who the hell owned an entire room full of them? It didn't take me long to solve the mystery. My uncle had worked as a market trader in the later years. He bought cheap products in bulk before he sold them on the weekly markets in the area. One of his last purchases had been these suitcases. I tried to figure out how many there were, but it was impossible. There had to be hundreds of the damn things. Hoping they'd at least be worth something, I gave one of them a closer look. They were big, huge even, but cheaply made. Even worse, they had to be decades old and clad out with strange inner fabric. Nonetheless, a few days later, I took one of them to a pawnshop in a nearby town. When I handed it over to the owner, he frowned. He turned it around a few times, opened it up, and checked the inside before he shook his head. I hope you didn't pay much for this, because it's pretty much worthless. The design is shoddy and old-fashioned, and the materials for crap. I sighed. Well, I expected as much. But don't you think collectors or vintage enthusiasts might be interested in them? The man shrugged. You could give eBay a try, but I wouldn't count on it. I guess you don't want to try it yourself, do you? The man laughed and shoved the suitcase back in my direction. No dice, too much of a hassle. I picked up the suitcase again, thanked the man, and made my way back to my uncle's home. Eventually, I sorted through the suitcases, picked out a select few in better condition, and brought them downstairs. I put them on the floor in a room I'd already stripped bare, my uncle's old bedroom. There, on the hardwood floor, I tried my best to take a few good pictures. It wasn't easy. These things were old and cheaply made, and even I had to admit they did look like crap. Even worse, my two feline roommates, Keisha and James, seemed to love them to death. The moment I turned away, one of them would have crawled into whatever suitcase I'd focused on at the moment. Keisha and James were both 3-year-old tabbies. While Keisha was bright orange, James was grayish-white. They were the sneakiest little troublemakers I'd ever come upon, and they made taking the pictures a living hell. Still, I couldn't imagine being out here in the middle of nowhere without them. Once I was done with the monumental task of taking a handful of pictures, I uploaded them to eBay. It took almost a week before the first reply came. A young man named Damien messaged me and said he was interested in them. He was a vintage collector and would like to come by and have a look. What do you know? Guess some people are interested in them. That's what I'd thought, at least. When Damien arrived and I showed him the actual suitcases, his mood went sour. No. Thanks for wasting my time. Well, you said you were interested, so that's because of the pictures. You didn't say the material was awful. God, these things smell. Those your grandpa's or something? I sighed audibly. What an asshole. Instead of yelling, however, I tried a different route. Tell you what, you can have them for free. That way your trip wasn't entirely. And what would I do with them? As I said, they smell like hell. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm good. With that, he made his way back outside and drove off without another word. No goodbye or anything. And thus I was left with hundreds of old, musty, and most importantly, worthless suitcases. When I came back to the room to get rid of them, Keisha and James were busy hiding in them. How come you guys love those so much? All I got for an answer was a loud meow from Keisha before she vanished inside one of them. I watched the two for a while and left the suitcases out for now. After another day of sorting through my uncle's things, I busied myself on the internet the next evening. For a while, I watched some videos on YouTube before I somehow ended up looking at cat toys and climbing trees. I blamed James, who snuggled up on my lap as I sat on the living room couch. I was sure they'd love one of them, especially out here in a half-empty house. But those things were pretty expensive. Right now, I couldn't afford something like that. At least, not until I sold my uncle's house. And that could very well take a while. Then I got another idea. I'd always been a do-it-yourself guy and looked up homemade cat climbing trees. Most of what I found, however, were box fortresses. Now, I'd loved the idea of a box fortress for Keisha and James, but being in the process of cleaning out a house, I couldn't afford to waste any boxes. So much for the box fortress, I thought. Sorry, little guy, I said to James as I scratched his head. Eventually, I got up to prepare myself something to eat. As I went on my way, I peeked into the next room over. Keisha was still there, sleeping in a half-open suitcase. Right at that moment, another one of my problems came to my mind. The freaking suitcases. What the hell would I do with them? How'd I even get rid of them? At that moment, something clicked. I couldn't build a box fortress because I didn't have any boxes. What I could do, however, was to build a suitcase fortress. Or, how I came to call it in my head, Suitcase Land. While I ate dinner, my mind was already hard at work, thinking about building a fort from suitcases. I had hundreds of the damn things just lying around, and for all I knew, they weren't worth a thing. I could just cut them open, tape them together if I wanted to. Hell, I could use a break from cleaning out the house and sorting through my uncle's things. It wasn't long before I started on my work. At first, I tried to use a carpet knife, but those suitcases proved sturdier than I thought. After a few minutes, I gave up in frustration, went to my uncle's old workshop, and returned with a saw. And that made things much easier. I cut away the left side of the suitcase, the first one, and then the right side. After that, I did the same to the next one, taping them together to create a tunnel. I don't know what drove me on, but I was at it for days and went completely overboard. At first, I extended the ground level and made it into a convoluted mess. Then I started on a second level. Eventually, I added towers and bridges, all made from suitcases or suitcase parts. What I had originally planned to be nothing but a circular tunnel comprising of a few suitcases soon became bigger. I guess I was bored and frustrated out here, and this project helped me live out my suppressed creative urges. Once I was done using more than half of the old musty suitcases, I couldn't help but be in awe. Suitcase Land had expanded from a small ground-based maze to a room-filling fortress of tunnels, towers, and dead ends. James and Keisha were head over heels in love with my creation. The moment I was done, they vanished inside Suitcase Land and weren't seen for hours. They must have been busy exploring the various tunnels, sneaking up on each other, or simply sleeping in one of the dead ends. I expected them to tire of it soon enough, but they kept at it for the entire next week, only leaving Suitcase Land to eat. After a while, I grew more curious, wondering what they're up to up there. After some deliberation and research on the internet, I bought a cat harness and a GoPro camera in the hopes of learning a little more about their adventures. The moment I made it home, I couldn't wait to get going. James was the first victim of my newfound curiosity. However, when I tried to fit the harness on him, he cried out and lamented in misery. I had to accept that this wouldn't work, at least not with James. When Keisha came out to eat, I tried my luck again. I fastened the GoPro to her neck and let her roam free. To my surprise, she didn't seem to mind the harness and accepted it after some early suspicions. At first, she was merely walking around the living room, testing her footing. Once she seemed satisfied and had adjusted to the harness, she made her way back to Suitcase Land, where James had vanished hours ago. While the cats were adventuring, I took care of a few things I'd neglected to create, the suitcase monstrosity around the house. Late in the evening, hours after I'd eaten dinner, I saw Keisha again. I picked her up and put her on my lap. What a swift motion. I removed the GoPro and inserted the SD card into my laptop as carefully as I could. I couldn't wait to watch the footage. I fast-forwarded through Keisha walking around the living room until she was on her way to Suitcase Land. For a while, she walked around it, scanning and sniffing the suitcases here and there. Then she walked to the entrance and ventured inside. I watched as she crawled through the barely lit entrance tunnel. The moment she made it around the first bend, however, the video became too dark to see anything. I continued it, playing it a while longer, and listened to Keisha move around before I closed it in frustration. Well, that was useless. Great idea, but as so often, I wasn't smart enough to think this through. The next day, I got another idea. After I'd gotten a hold of the cats and made sure they were nowhere near Suitcase Land, I put tiny holes into the first couple of suitcases, hoping to lighten up the footage. That result proved less than satisfactory. You could see the tiny glowing circles, but that was about it. The rest was still nothing but darkness. My last resort was to get a tiny mag light and fasten it to the GoPro. As a test, I turned off all the lights in the living room and let Keisha walk around for a bit to see if it would work. To my surprise, it worked out well enough. So once again, I let Keisha go, hoping she'd set out on another adventure into Suitcase Land, which she promptly did. When I woke up the following day, the first thing I saw was James' little face. He'd crawled up on top of me and was meowing right into my face. "Well, aren't you happy to see me, little guy?" I petted him for a bit and stroked his back, but he didn't purr like he usually did. "What's the matter, little buddy? You hungry?" I got up and made my way to the feeding bowls, but James didn't follow me. Instead, he walked halfway through the living room and stared at Suitcase Land. "Hey, what's the matter with you this morning?" I asked, petting him. The moment I touched him, he jerked up before realizing it was me. He pushed himself against me, almost huddling behind me, but his eyes never moved from Suitcase Land. "What's wrong?" I asked again before I realized I hadn't seen Keisha. I called out her name but got no reaction. Normally, she'd come running the moment I called her. Eventually, I made my way to the entrance of Suitcase Land, staring inside and calling for her again. Nothing. When I turned back, I saw James hadn't moved and was still keeping a safe distance from the place. What if something had happened to Keisha in there? For the first time, I regretted building this entire stupid thing. I went to the entrance and called out once more. When that didn't do anything, I started shaking the first few suitcases, hoping she'd come out. Still nothing. Before long, I wandered around the entire construction, leaning in close and calling her again and again. Finally, I heard a quiet, muffled meow originating from inside. I rattled more of the suitcases, but she still didn't come out. The idea of her being hurt was on my mind instantly. For a moment, I just wanted to tear the entire thing down, but how long would it take before I'd find her? Even worse, what if I'd end up hurting her more? Hell, she might be right there, past the first bend, unable to move. I cursed and got myself a flashlight before I pushed my upper body into the first suitcase. "Keisha!" I called out. I pushed my arms outward, but there was no way I could reach the first bend. Then, with little choice, I got down on my hands and knees and pushed myself into the first suitcase. To my surprise, I could make it inside. Those things were huge. This was ridiculous. I built this stupid thing for the cats, not for myself. I'd have laughed about how ridiculous this was if I wasn't so worried about Keisha. After a few moments, I made it far enough to reach the first bend and could look around it. I illuminated the tunnel in front of me using the flashlight, but all I saw were more interconnected suitcases and a mess of inner fabric. I didn't see a hint of Keisha. I called out again, and soon the strangely quiet and muffled meow reached my ears once more. "Who the hell are you?" I cursed to myself. Pushing myself past the first bend proved almost impossible. More than once I entangled myself in the soft inner fabric. As I tore myself free and onward, I could hear the tape I'd used to connect the suitcases stretch and almost tore the entire thing apart. Then I was through. As I illuminated the tunnel ahead of me, I realized how big the damn thing was. What the hell kind of monstrosity had I built here? How'd I ever thought that building a room-sized cat fortress was a good idea? I crawled on, flashlight in hand, but saw no hint of Keisha. The further I continued, the less difficult it became to move. At first, I could barely fit through the tunnels and had to push myself forward on my stomach. By now, I could crawl forward on my hands and knees. How was there so much room in here? This shouldn't be possible. Maybe it was because of different suitcase sizes, I reasoned. I'd probably use bigger ones for this part. But had there been any that were bigger than the rest? Hadn't they all been the same size? I felt a cold shiver running down my spine. I stopped and took a deep breath for a moment, but then I heard Keisha again. This time it was coming from my right. It was still the same sounding, nearby, but strangely distant. As I illuminated the area before me, I soon noticed various tunnels. I counted 6 to my left and 5 to my right. Had I added that many? One by one, I illuminated them and listened. Before long, I pinpointed Keisha's meows in the third tunnel to my right. I pushed myself inside, hoping to find Keisha in a dead end. Instead, the tunnel continued. It was bending in various ways before it began sloping upward. By now, I couldn't fight the strange feeling that had come over me anymore. Why was there a slope in here? How was this thing so big? This was ridiculous. Before long, I felt hot and sweaty, could barely breathe, as panic came over me. Claustrophobia. This had to be some sort of hallucination caused by claustrophobia. In the onset of panic, I tried to give up, tried to tear the damn tunnel apart and escape. As much as I tried, as much as I moved, the suitcases didn't come apart. I desperately clawed at the inner fabric, trying to find the connections, the tape, but I couldn't find them. Where the hell was it? My hands dug through more and more of the inner fabric, tearing it apart. The more I did, though, the less it felt like fabric and more like something different, something almost organic. I was hyperventilating, close to freaking out, and had to tell myself to calm down and to breathe, and yet I couldn't help it. Finally, I threw myself against the side of the tunnel again and again, but it didn't budge, didn't move at all. I stopped my rampage when I heard Keisha meowing again. "You stupid freaking cat. This is all because of you," I cursed out loud. I was angry now, angry and afraid, and in a state of perpetual half-panic. The slope continued for an impossibly long time. Again and again I brushed against the inner fabric. By now it felt wet and sticky, almost like skin. Here and there I thought I saw it bulging, as if something behind it was breathing and moving. For a moment I closed my eyes and took another deep breath, before I concentrated on the beam of the flashlight in front of me. Eventually the tunnel opened up to a wider area. A brief laugh escaped my mouth. There was no way this was real. I had to be imagining it. This wasn't a cut-open suitcase anymore. No, this was a vast, empty chamber. I heard the meow again. It was coming right in front of me this time, however. I realized it wasn't muffled, hadn't been. Instead, it was all distorted, all wrong, as if it was a faulty recording of Keisha's meow. I tensed up as terror gripped me. Something was wrong here. Keisha, I brought out in a shaken voice. At that moment, the flashlight beam illuminated something in front of me. There, on the ground, was a tiny maglite, next to it, the GoPro. I picked them up and pocketed them before I noticed the harness. How the hell had it come off? I saw it right away. It was torn apart at the back. How'd Keisha? No, there was no way she'd be able to tear it apart. Once more, a cold shiver went down my spine. If not Keisha, then what? As if to answer me, the sound of distant rustling reached me. Then I heard the soft inner fabric ahead of me being torn apart. It sounded as if something was cutting through it. My body froze, my fingers were clutching onto the flashlight, and I watched in disbelief as the tunnel at the end of the chamber started shaking. The sound of something taking a long, strained breath reached me, and with it I heard the distorted version of Keisha's meow again. A quiet, high-pitched yelp escaped my mouth, and I scrambled backward away from the sounds ahead of me. When something touched my arm, I screamed. For a moment I flailed around, trying to find whatever was attacking me. Then I heard a well-known meow, this time undistorted, followed by a slight hiss. When I turned around, I saw Keisha behind me. She looked terrified. Her little cat eyes were wide open, and I could see she was limping. I instantly got a hold of her and cuddled her between my arms. For a second, she let me, before she freed herself, and snuck past me again. "No, Keisha, wait!" I called out, but when I looked after her, I was confused. The slope was gone. Instead, I saw the very first bend right behind me. I crawled back and pushed myself around the bend. Once more, I barely fit, but when I made it, Keisha was sitting there waiting for me. Half a minute later, I made it back outside and had escaped from Suitcase land. Still shaking and sweating, I stared at the construction in front of me and measured it up with my eyes. There was no hint of any slope, no hint of a central chamber, or the multitude of tunnels I'd seen. Even the longest part of this damn thing barely measured more than a few meters. There was no way any of what I'd just witnessed was real. No, it must have all been a hallucination. Remembering Keisha, I turned around and swiftly got a hold of her. She was exhausted and clearly hurt. I took her to the vet instantly. When I arrived, the vet told me that Keisha was very agitated and asked me what had happened to her. I was about to tell her about Suitcase Land, but then I stopped and made up a story instead. Well, I let her out yesterday afternoon and she only returned this morning. She was hurt and limping. Maybe she got into a fight with a stray? The vet eyed me for a moment. She has a bruised leg, but it's nothing serious. What I'm concerned about is her back. That wound's not from another cat. It looks more like a cut. Maybe from a bird, but I've seen nothing like it. After a more thorough analysis, it turned out that the wound on the back wasn't as bad as initially thought. It was nothing but a scratch and had barely broken the skin. In that instant, I remembered the torn harness. What the hell had happened to Keisha? For now, though, I was happy to hear that she wasn't hurt seriously, and that the worst was the agitation. The vet advised me to keep her in the house for at least a week, and ensure she wouldn't lick the wound excessively. Once I made it back home, the first thing I did was dismantle Suitcase Land. It didn't take long, since I tore it apart by force. I was apprehensive the entire time, afraid something or someone hiding inside would attack me. Nothing like that happened, and after only an hour, Suitcase Land was nothing but an enormous stack of cut open and half torn apart suitcases. Before long, I reasoned that Keisha must have injured herself on a zipper. Hell, maybe she'd somehow bitten or scratched through the harness after all. In my experience, nothing but hallucinations caused by an onset of claustrophobia. I didn't know I suffered from. With that, the entire story of Suitcase Land was over. Or it would have been if I hadn't remembered the GoPro. It was still working, and when I inserted the SD card into my laptop, I saw that the memory was filled with one giant video file. It was this video that changed everything. Soon enough, though, things became strange. I watched as Keisha made her way onto Suitcase Land, like so many times before. I watched with wide eyes as she ran through and explored ever-expanding and ever-widening tunnels. Keisha was traveling far, far further than should have been possible. Before long, she ran up and down slopes, crawled through holes, and explored wide-arching chambers. It was an absolute impossibility, yet it was all right here, right in front of me on the screen. I heard the entirety of the Suitcase Land shake before the camera turned dark. It grew closer and closer, and then Keisha froze, and I heard the same rustling and tearing sounds I'd heard myself. A second later, I heard Keisha meow, heard her hiss furiously, followed by a snap. The harness, I thought. That's when the harness was cut off. After that, the video comprised nothing but darkness, but I could still hear strained breathing nearby. And then, to my utter horror, a figure was moving in the darkness and pushed itself closer to the camera. A moment later, I heard the distorted imitation of Keisha's meow again and saw a single alien eye staring right at me.
Hoodlums. In 2008, on a Tuesday evening in San Augustine, a small East Texas town, Bill Vickers and Gabriel Lechuga lingered next to a burning 55-gallon barrel. On the ground next to the barrel lay a pile of non-metallic sheathed cable stolen from a construction site. The non-metallic sheathed cable, also known as Romex, contained solid copper wiring and could be sold to a scrapyard for around $4 per pound. The men were thieves and would steal anything of value. The previous night they snuck into a new home being built and cut the wiring from the walls and ceiling. To fetch a higher price for the copper at a metal recycler, the insulation needed to be removed, so they were tossing the Romex into the burning barrel. Living in a run-down mobile home park, the two men showed no regard for their neighbors as the insulation created toxic smoke that engulfed the surrounding homes. Bill plopped down on the tailgate of his truck, then popped open a can of beer. At 45 years old, Bill had never done an honest day's work. Wearing a grimy yellow t-shirt with an image of a marijuana leaf, faded and tattered camo pants, and worn-out tennis shoes, it appeared he just crawled out from under a rock. He also exhibited the stereotypical appearance of a drug addict: slender frame, rough skin, unkempt and greasy black hair, rotted teeth, and a scraggly beard. A career thief, his primary income came from receiving welfare, food stamps, and Section 8 housing. Hence the dilapidated 1971 mobile home he lived in. To supplement his income, mainly to buy drugs, he broke into vehicles and houses, stealing anything of value. He didn't like thieving copper. It took too much effort, and he didn't care for the physical work aspect of it. Stealing the wiring created a financial burden for the builder. Not only did the builder have to incur the cost of replacing the stolen Romex, which cost about $2,500, but the labor for an electrical contractor to reinstall the ruffian usually cost another $2,500. Bill and Gabriel would only get about $1,000 at the metal recycler, compared to the builder's total loss of around $5,000. Thieves are never concerned about the actual damage and cost they bestow upon others.
The two thieves not only stole electrical wiring from houses, but if the mechanical system was installed, they would also cut the copper refrigeration piping, creating an additional loss for the builder. Fortunately for the builder, most plumbers nowadays install PEX, a polyethylene pipe for the potable water supply system instead of a copper pipe. Otherwise, the builders would be enduring an even greater loss. Bill chugged his beer, then tossed the can on the ground next to the other empty containers in the random trash.
How much you think we gonna be able to fetch for this pile of copper?
Gabriel scratched his chin as he scrutinized the pile.
That's probably about 200 or 300 pounds, so anywhere from 800 to 1,200 bucks.
Gabriel, a 35-year-old Hispanic man, sported a stocky physique with a beer gut, bald head, large handlebar mustache, and gang-related tattoos covered his arms and neck. He donned a black t-shirt, blue jean pants, and black combat boots. During his teenage years, he lived in Houston, Texas, where he ran with the gang. Growing up fighting, stealing, vandalizing, and slinging dope, he possessed a violent temperament and exhibited little to no empathy for others. Unbeknownst to Bill, Gabriel harbored a dark secret. 3 years ago, he robbed a bank in Houston, murdering the clerk in the process, so he moved to San Augustine to hide out at his cousin's apartment. A short time after that, Gabriel broke into a house, and during the burglary, he found Emma Hawkins, a 25-year-old school teacher, asleep in her bed. He raped her numerous times over the night, then cut her throat. The authorities never linked a suspect to the crime. Bill opened another can of beer.
We need to probably lay off stealing copper for a while until shit simmers down.
Gabriel tossed a roll of wire into the barrel, engulfing the air with embers.
Why? It's easy pickings. Dude, everyone's pissed about it, and I heard the cops are gonna start hiding out in some of the houses so they can bust whoever's stealing the copper.
He pulled a flask from his rear pocket, then plopped down in a lawn chair.
Where the hell are you hearing that shit from? That's the word on the street. You mean those crackheads you hang out with? They're not crackheads, and it's also been in the news. In fact, Channel 10 did a story about it yesterday. They even gave a description of my fucking truck. Bullshit. Look it up yourself.
Gabriel pulled out his cell phone and searched for Channel 10 News. Sure enough, the story went into detail about copper being stolen from construction sites. A description of a vehicle was also given. An orange late 90s single-cab Ford Ranger, a Confederate flag covering the top of the cab, and the number 01 painted on each door. The article stated the driver was a person of interest.
So what? They can't prove shit. If I get pulled over, the cops are gonna ask why my truck was in that subdivision. Just say you're a framer and we're looking for work. But I don't know shit about framing. Then just tell the fuckers you clean up job sites. I've hauled scrap metal before, so that would be a good excuse.
Gabriel grumbled as he eyed Bill's truck.
I've always told you that damn truck stands out like a sore dick. You need to get something else so this shit doesn't happen again.
Not having a pot to piss in, Bill revered his truck and considered it his prized possession. He patted the bed as he sat on the tailgate.
This is my whip, boy. I ain't getting rid of it.
Being over 25 years old, the truck not only showed its age, but Bill had painted it orange with cans of spray paint, and hand-painted the Confederate flag and the number 01 with latex house paint using a paintbrush.
It's a piece of shit. Maybe, but it's my piece of shit, and it's paid for.
Bill lit a cigarette.
So now what the fuck we gonna do to make extra cash?
Not sure, but I'll figure something out. Gabriel started to put up his phone, but an advertisement popped up. Normally he ignored clickbait like everyone else, but this one caught his eye. He clicked on it, opening another news article.
Hey man, check this shit out.
He handed his phone to Bill. Bill noticed a photo of a graveyard and shiny flower vases stood at every tombstone. The article stated Cedar Creek Cemetery received a grant for 300 new flower vases to replace the old ones, and the work was completed last weekend.
So what? They got new vases.
They're fucking made of bronze, and I bet we can fetch $10 to $15 a piece for them at the recycler. Cedar Creek Cemetery was located just a few miles down the road from the mobile home park in one of the oldest cemeteries in Texas, with graves dating back to the early 1800s. Born and raised in San Augustine, Bill grew up hearing countless horror stories and other strange tales about the eerie cemetery and its caretaker, an old man named Ben Hamilton, and not once has he ever stepped foot on the sacred ground.
Fuck that. I'm not messing around with that graveyard.
Gabriel sometimes mixed Spanish with English.
Don't tell me your ass is miedo a los fantasmas. You know I only know Spanish curse words.
Are you scared of ghosts?
Well, I don't believe in that shit. And that's not it, so just drop it.
Gabriel lit a cigarette, then slouched in his chair. You need to man up and stop acting like a pinche perra.
I'm not a fucking bitch. That graveyard is evil, and the old man is some kind of demon or something, and he lures people there so he can punish them for their sins.
What old man?
Bill Hamilton. He's the gravedigger.
First off, demons, the devil, and other shit like that are just made up to keep people in line by the government. And what the fuck are you talking about he lures people there?
What I understand is Ben can't leave the graveyard, so he finds a way to trick people into coming there.
A troubled expression came over him as he sat forward in his chair.
Like that news article about the bronze vases that popped up on your phone. He's trying to lure us there because he knows what we've been doing.
That's a bunch of nonsense, and I'm surprised you believe in that silly shit.
Haven't you ever heard the stories about the gravedigger?
No, man. I don't pay any attention to fairy tales. That's for kids. And we're gonna get those fucking vases, so stop being a puto.
Dude, I'm not stepping foot in that graveyard.
Gabriel's eyes narrowed in anger as he glared at Bill. Fuck if you're not. Even if I have to drag your ass there, you're going. Bill feared Gabriel more than Ben Hamilton and the folklore that surrounded the cemetery. And in the back of his head, he figured the stories were just old wives' tales anyway.
If something happens to me, it's gonna be your fault.
Gabriel snickered. I can live with that. The graveyard. The following Friday, around midnight, the two thieves were parked on the side of the road in front of Cedar Creek Cemetery. The moon illuminated the night just enough for Bill to see the old wrought iron fence that ran along the front of the graveyard. Stone walls sat on each side of the main entrance, and on top of them sat a large wrought iron arch. Below the arch hung a sign that read Cedar Creek Cemetery. A feeling of anxiety came over Bill when he noticed the wrought iron gates were closed with a sign that read no access to cemetery between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Trespassers will be prosecuted.
This place is locked up tighter than a drum. Maybe we should turn around.
That's why I brought the bolt cutters.
I think this is a bad idea, man.
Gabriel pulled a revolver from his waistband.
Don't worry. If I see any monsters or goblins, I'll pop a cap in their ass. I never said anything about monsters and goblins. I was just trying to tell you what I heard about the old gravedigger.
If I see that fucker, I'll pop a cap in his ass too. His stomach knotted up, knowing if Gabriel killed the old man, he had been accomplice to murder.
You can't do that, dude. If we see him, we just need to run.
I ain't running from no one. Gabriel pointed to a wooded area across the road.
Go hide this pedazo de mierda behind those trees. It's not a piece of shit.
Bill despised Gabriel's demeaning and abusive personality, but being a follower, he always tucked his tail and took the mistreatment. After Bill parked his truck behind some brush, Gabriel handed him a small .22 caliber Derringer. "Keep that in your pocket." He accidentally pointed the gun at Gabriel as he examined it.
"Why did you give me this? I don't need—"
Gabriel shoved Bill's hand to the side, pointing the barrel away from himself.
"Watch where you're pointing it, pendejo. It's loaded." "Oh, sorry, man."
"There's no safety, and you have to keep it half-cocked in case it's dropped. If you need to fire it, just pull the hammer back the rest of the way, then pull the trigger."
Okay. And why do I need this?"
"In case shit goes south."
"And what's the deal with the hammer and dropping it?"
"The firing pin rests on the bullet, so if it's dropped and the hammer isn't half-cocked, the gun could go off."
Is it broken?"
"No, it's designed that way."
"What a piece of shit."
"Just put the damn thing in your pocket and don't play around with it. And if you have to use it, make sure you aim for the throat."
"What the hell are you talking about, aim for the throat?"
"If you have to use that on someone, try to shoot them in the throat since it's just a .22.
"Who in the hell am I going to be shooting at in the cemetery?"
"Just keep it in your pocket. If you need it, you got it." Gabriel checked his flashlight to make sure it worked. "Are the batteries in your flashlight good?" Bill flipped his light on and off.
"Yep."
Gabriel grabbed 4 duffel bags from behind the seat, then tossed 2 of them to Bill. "Let's get this shit done." When they approached the double gates, Gabriel noticed the chain and padlock were laying on the ground. "You lying motherfucker. You said this shit was locked up tighter than a drum."
"It's fucking dark. It looked like it was locked from the truck."
Gabriel tossed his bolt cutters into one of the bags. "You're such a mierda de pollo. I don't even know why I keep you around."
"I'm not fucking chicken shit, and I don't know why I keep putting up with your crap."
"Don't start whining." When they slipped through the gates, an eerie feeling came over Bill. On the outside of the walls, the moonlight illuminated the night, but the inside held a mysterious darkness. The temperature felt cooler, and the smell of death lingered in the air.
"This doesn't feel right. We need to get the fuck out of here."
"Stop being a pussy, and let's get this shit done." Bill was at his limit with Gabriel's mouthiness.
"Man, you don't have to be such a...
Such a what?"
"Nothing."
"If you got something to say, say it."
"You don't have to be so rude."
"Don't get your panties in a wad. I'm trying to make a man out of you."
"That's the kind of shit I'm talking about."
"Let's just worry about getting this job done. You can mope and whine later after we get paid." As they moved further into the centuries-old graveyard, apprehension engulfed Bill as he observed old gravestones, crypts, and statues of all ages, sizes, rising from a thick cloud of fog that drifted close to the earth.
"Damn, dude, this place is spooky as fuck."
"Yeah, if you're fucking 12. Gabriel searched the area with his flashlight. "Do you see any of the vases?"
"No, man, I don't see shit."
A strange feeling swept over Bill as he thought about it.
"Oh, shit. Maybe that news article really was a trick to get us here."
"Don't start with that fairy tale shit again. They're in here somewhere. We just need to find them." As the men traveled deeper into the graveyard, large oak trees began to shroud most of the moonlight, creating an uncanny darkness that seemed to absorb the light from their flashlights. Suddenly, a sense of doom came over Bill, stopping him in his tracks. Frightened, he quickly searched the area around them. When his light struck an old column-top tombstone, a chill ran down his spine. The grave felt oddly familiar, but this was his first time stepping foot in the cemetery. When he glimpsed the name on the tombstone, his heart seemed to stop. Gabriel shined his light at Bill as he stood dumbfounded. "What are you doing? Stop fucking around and keep moving." When Bill didn't respond, he trudged over to him. "What's wrong with you?" Bill's hand shook with fear as he pointed to the tombstone.
I told you this was a mistake coming here. Now we're both doomed."
"What the hell are you talking about?"
"That's my grave."
"What?" Gabriel shined his light on the old tombstone, observing the name William Clyde Vickers. He's got the same last name, so what? William Clyde Vickers is my full name. I'm sure there's a bunch of fuckers with that same name. He gazed at Gabriel with a look of apprehension. June 22nd, 1963. What? That's my birth date. And it's the same date on the tombstone. Bullshit. You're just saying that to fuck with me. I'm serious, dude. I'll show you my license. And look at the date of death. Gabriel scrutinized the tombstone for a moment, observing today's date was inscribed as the date of death. Well, I guess you're fucked then. It's not funny. We need to get the hell out of here before it's too late. Dude, chill the fuck out. It's just a coincidence. He illuminated the tombstone, noting its age. The tombstone is like 100 years old. Some jackass must have made a mistake and wrote 1963 instead of 1863. No, man. There's some evil shit going on, and I'm getting the fuck out of here. We ain't leaving without those vases, and I'm not telling you again. He motioned with his flashlight. Get your ass moving. Bill wanted to flee the cemetery, but his fear of Gabriel kept him trekking forward. About 300 feet further into the graveyard, they came upon an area with hundreds of shiny bronze flower vases that rose from the fog. Gabriel gazed with wide eyes as he grinned wickedly. Damn, muchacho, we hit the premio maximo. Bill forgot about his fears as he ogled the loot while visualizing all the crack rocks, weed, and booze he could buy. Hell yeah, boy! Billy Jack gonna get paid! When excited, Bill sometimes referred to himself as Billy Jack. Stop jawing and let's get these fuckers hauled out of here. It's gonna take several trips to get them all. Like greedy kids at an Easter egg hunt, Gabriel and Bill began shoving the vases into their bags as fast as they could. When they each filled 2 duffel bags, they began lugging them through the cemetery. Bill struggled with the weight of his bags as he plodded behind Gabriel. Dude, we should have brought a dolly or something. These are heavy as fuck. Just keep going, man. We're almost there. When they came to the entrance, Gabriel found the gate secured with a chain and padlock. Did you lock this when we came through the first time? Short-winded, Bill dropped his bags as he panted. No, man. A gut-wrenching feeling swept over him as he thought about it. Oh, shit. That means the old man is around here somewhere. Fuck him. Gabriel pulled the bolt cutters from his bag, then cut the chain in 2. What if he calls the cops? I doubt he even knows we're here, but if the cops do show up, we'll just sneak out the backside of the cemetery. What about my truck? It's fucking hidden, so they won't find it. We'll just come back later and get it. When the men entered the wooded area across the street from the cemetery, Bill noticed his truck was missing. Son of a bitch! Someone stole my fucking truck! Gabriel scanned the area with his flashlight. Are you sure we're in the right spot? Bill illuminated the ground. Fuck yeah! I can see my tire tracks in the grass. A wave of frustration came over him. I can't believe some sorry motherfucker stole my ride. Don't tell me you left the fucking keys in it. I'm not fucking stupid. They're in my pocket. And what the fuck am I gonna do now? I don't have insurance. They did you a favor. It was a piece of shit anyway. Dude, I don't have the money to buy another one. And how in the fuck are we gonna get home? I'll call my cousin after we're done getting the rest of the vases. Rest of the vases? We need to go look for my fucking truck. I'm not worried about that shit right now. What about the old man? I'm not worried about him either. Gabriel dumped the vases from his bags, placing them next to a tree. Dump out your bags so we can make another run. As Bill emptied his bags, anger consumed him, knowing the amount he'd make from selling his share of the bronze wouldn't even be enough to buy another truck.
This shit ain't right, man. I'm getting fucked. I knew this was a bad idea from the start.
Stop whining. Feeling used, Bill sulked as he followed Gabriel back to the cemetery. Impending doom. An agglomeration of emotions consumed Bill as he trudged behind Gabriel through the knee-high fog. His anxiety and fear of the graveyard were now replaced with disappointment, resentment, and anger over his truck. As he moped along, he played with the derringer in his pocket. Gabriel could hear Bill grumbling to himself as his feet trampled leaves and twigs laying on the ground.
Stop making so much damn racket.
Bill groaned as he brooded in self-pity.
I'm not doing it on purpose.
Gabriel also detected a clicking sound coming from Bill. He paused, and when he shined his light on him, he noticed his hand was in his pocket.
I know you're not fucking with that gun. I'm not.
Suddenly, a loud pop echoed out. Then a cloud of smoke emerged from the side of his pants. In a panic, Bill jerked his hand from his pocket and quickly examined it with his flashlight. Then he moved the light to his crotch and left leg.
Oh, shit. I might have shot myself.
Relief came over him when he didn't locate any blood or a bullet hole.
Damn, dude. Your fucking gun went off in my pocket for no reason.
When Gabriel didn't respond, he moved his light to where he originally stood. To his horror, he found him lying on the ground. He rushed over to him and knelt.
Are you all right, dude?
I'm not sure, man. He rubbed his head.
It feels like I was hit with a club or something.
Nausea came over Bill when he spotted blood running out of a small hole in Gabriel's forehead. Worried Gabriel would become upset, he didn't want to tell him he shot him in the head.
No, man, you were just walking along, then you fell. Maybe you hit your head on the ground.
Gabriel rubbed his forehead, then scrutinized the blood on his fingers.
Damn, I guess I tripped.
He started to rise, but paused as his memory came back to him.
Hold up. I remember now. You fucking shot me.
Bill quickly stepped back.
It was an accident, man. I swear. Accident my ass. I told you not to play around with the gun. I know, man. I know. Please don't be mad.
Gabriel rubbed his forehead as he thought about being shot in the head. Most people would be panicking and dialing 911 or rushing to a hospital, but he exhibited little fear in life and even less empathy.
Damn, I've been shot before, but never in the fucking head. I'm really sorry, dude. I didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah, you are sorry. He stood to his feet.
And you owe me big time for this shit. Anything you want, man. Just name it. I'm taking your share of the bronze for starters.
Bill knew not to debate the issue, especially since he just shot his partner in the head.
That's fair.
Gabriel held out his hand.
Give me the fucking juguete. Give you what? The fucking gun.
Bill handed it to him.
How can you take a shot to the head like that and still be standing?
I'm too fucking mean to die.
I'm being serious.
It's a fucking .22. He felt his forehead.
It's just a flesh wound, and I doubt it even went through my skull. That's why I told you to shoot for the throat.
Oh. Gabriel nodded.
We fucked around enough. Let's get moving.
When they arrived at the location with the vases, confusion came over Gabriel as he examined the area with his flashlight.
Are we in the right spot? Something doesn't seem right. I thought we already started on this area.
Bill shined his light across several tombstones, noticing bronze vases stood at each of the graves.
That's weird as fuck. I've already taken ones from these graves.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I recognize the names on some of these tombstones.
In a panic, he began searching the area with his flashlight.
That means someone replaced them.
A feeling of horror swept over him.
Oh, shit. The gravedigger must have done it.
An angered expression came over Gabriel.
That means he's fucking with us. I'm out of here, dude.
Overcome with terror, Bill started to walk off, but a strange feeling came over him. He clutched his chest as he knelt on one knee.
Something's wrong. I'm feeling dizzy and my chest is hurting.
You're probably just having one of your damn panic attacks. Bill didn't respond as he fell onto his face. Gabriel grabbed Bill by the hair and jerked his head back, then observed his eyes were rolled back into their sockets. When he noticed he wasn't breathing, he let his head plop back to the ground, then stood up as he grumbled.
Damn! Motherfucker fell over dead.
He looked around, then grabbed Bill by one of his legs and began dragging him toward a group of bushes to conceal his body. Suddenly, Bill awoke and let out a loud gasp, then sat up with wide eyes.
What the fuck? Why am I on the ground?
Gabriel released his leg and chuckled.
I thought your ass had died. What do you mean?
You grabbed your chest and then fell to the ground. I gave you CPR, but you didn't respond. Bill wiped his mouth.
Seriously? You had to give me mouth to mouth?
Yeah, man. You do the same for me. Bill stood up and began brushing himself off.
Where in the hell were you dragging me to?
To the entrance so I could have an ambulance pick you up.
That was weird as fuck. I hope I didn't have a heart attack or something.
I'm sure you're fine. Just try not to get yourself so worked up so much. Gabriel retrieved the 2 duffel bags Bill dropped and tossed them to him. Let's get these vases packed up so we can get the fuck out of here.
Are you serious? You still want to take them after the shit that's happened to us?
I came here to get paid, and I'm not leaving without them.
Dude, you got shot in the head, and I think I had a heart attack. That's a bad sign. We need to heed the warning and get out of here before we're not so lucky.
Just fill up your damn bags. We'll be done in no time. As Gabriel began bagging up the vases, Bill caressed his chest.
Dude, I can't feel my heartbeat. I think there's something wrong with my heart.
Stop fucking around and get your bags loaded. We can take your ass to the ER when we're done. As Bill headed over to a tombstone to retrieve a vase, the ground slightly gave way, making a crumpling sound. Thinking he stepped on a grave, collapsing a rotted casket, he moved his light to his feet. His eyes opened wide with disbelief.
What the fuck?
He began raking at the ground with his foot. Gabriel stomped over to him. Now what the fuck are you doing?
It's my fucking truck. Someone buried it.
At the bottom of the fog and slightly buried under the dirt, Gabriel noticed there was a Confederate flag painted on a piece of sheet metal. Then he examined the earth around it. The ground hasn't been disturbed, so it can't be your truck.
Yes, it is. I recognize my paint job.
You just had a mental episode, and now your mind is just playing tricks on you.
No, it's not.
Bill fell to his knees and began hand-digging around the edges until he exposed some glass.
Here's the fucking windshield.
Bewildered, Gabriel stood dumbfounded as he eyed the top of the truck. How was that possible?
I told you this place is evil, dude. We should have never come here.
He glanced up from the ground.
Are you going to help me get it out?
Now sensing a supernatural presence loomed over him, Gabriel shook his head as he exhibited a troubled expression. No, man. I'm getting the fuck out of here.
I need your help, man.
There's no way we can dig that shit out with just our hands.
I'm not leaving my truck behind.
When Bill uncovered the top of his driver's side window, spiders came crawling out of his truck. Gabriel took several steps backwards.
Oh, hell no. I can't stand fucking spiders. Seriously, dude? You're scared of spiders?
I ain't scared of nothing.
Then help me get my truck out.
Your ass can stay here all night fucking with it, but I'm leaving. Bill rose to his feet.
I'm not staying here by myself. I guess I'll have to come back here in the morning with a shovel.
Inundated with apprehension, the two men remained quiet as they quickly trekked through the graveyard. When they made it to the entrance, Gabriel found the gates were secured with a large diameter chain.
Someone locked the gate again. Hurry up and cut that shit. I want to get the fuck out of here.
Gabriel tried to cut the chain with the bolt cutters, but the diameter of the links were too large to fit inside its jaws.
Damn it! This is a larger chain and I can't cut it.
As he searched for the padlock, uncertainty came over him.
What the fuck? What's wrong?
There's no lock on the chain.
Is it tied together with wire or something?
No, it's fucking continuous.
What do you mean?
The chain doesn't have any breaks in it. Bill shined his light on the chain.
Is it welded together?
I don't see any welds.
Well, how is that possible?
I don't know, man. Something strange is going on.
Now do you believe me that this place is evil?
I don't know what to think. Bill scanned the top of the gates with his flashlight, then examined the top of the wrought iron fence and stone walls.
The fence is too tall to climb. How in the fuck are we gonna get out of here?
There should be another gate somewhere, or a place where the fence is lower. As they walked along the inside perimeter, searching for a way to escape, Bill spotted a faint light coming from the middle of the graveyard.
Hold up, man. I see someone. Turn off your light.
Gabriel quickly shut off his flashlight, then squatted down as he observed two lights in the distance. It looks like there's two people. He noticed the lights seemed to be getting closer. Shit! They're heading our direction. He pulled his revolver from his waistband. Hide so they don't see us. As the men hunkered down in the fog behind a large tombstone, Bill detected the sound of an engine.
I think it's a vehicle.
Gabriel peeked around the corner of the tombstone. It sure in the fuck is.
Do you think it's the cops? The old man might have called them.
I don't think so. They would be using a spotlight to look for us, and it's too small to be a cop car. As the vehicle crept along a gravel road a short distance away, Bill began to hear the old song, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive by Hank Williams.
Do you hear that creepy shit they're playing?
Yeah, must be some fucking rednecks.
Do you think there's more than one person?
How in the fuck would I know? But once they start heading away from us, we're gonna haul ass the other way. Normally, Bill's heart would be pounding from his adrenaline rush, but he couldn't even detect a heartbeat.
Something's wrong, man. I still can't feel my heart. Will you put your ear on my chest and see if you can hear my heartbeat?
I'm not doing that shit, you might have gone.
I'm not a faggot. I'm just worried there's something wrong with me.
Dude, you're fine. Just try to stay calm. As the vehicle passed by them just a few yards away, Bill noticed a white-colored 01 painted on an orange door.
Dude, it's my fucking truck.
Enraged, he forgot about his heart as he rose to his feet and shouted,
Hey, that's my...
Gabriel jerked him back to the ground. Shut the fuck up, pendejo, and stay down.
But they're taking my ride.
A feeling of an impending doom lingered over Gabriel. Let them have it. I just want to get the fuck out of here.
I can't believe they buried my truck, then dug it back up. That doesn't make any sense.
I'm not sure what the fuck is going on, but there's definitely some strange shit happening tonight. As the taillights disappeared into the darkness, Gabriel scrambled to his feet. Let's roll. As they trotted in the opposite direction, a sense of dread swept over Bill.
My heart should be beating fast since I'm running, but I can't even feel it.
Gabriel didn't detect his heartbeat either, creating an uncanny feeling.
We can't worry about that right now. Let's just find a way out of here. Then I'll have my cousin take us to the hospital. Are you feeling strange too?
Being a stubborn person, he didn't want to admit that something was wrong, or that he was frightened.
I'm good, dude. Just taking you there so you can get checked out.
A short distance later, Gabriel slowed to a walk.
Do you hear that?
Yeah. It's faint, but it sounds like someone screaming.
Where's it coming from?
I'm not sure.
A couple of steps further, Bill stopped in his tracks.
Hold up. I think it's coming from underground.
Gabriel could feel the sound resonating on the bottom of his feet.
What the hell? There must be an underground structure.
That's creepy as fuck. But why would they be screaming?
I don't know, man.
He dropped to his knees, and when he stuck an ear to the ground, he could hear the screams of numerous people.
Oh, shit. It's a bunch of people screaming.
Then, to his horror, he heard his name being called out. He scrambled to his feet.
I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Bill noticed Gabriel's horrified facial expression.
Oh, what's wrong, dude? What did you hear?
They're calling my name.
What?
Whoever the fuck is down there is yelling out my name.
That's impossible.
Suddenly, the ground collapsed under Gabriel, and his lower body fell into a hole. As he desperately tried to pull himself out, he wailed,
"Oh shit! Sácame la mierda de aquí!"
As Bill wrenched on his arms, he observed smoke rising from the hole, and he could hear the roaring sound of thousands of tormented people screaming as if they were burning in hell.
What the fuck? Do you hear that shit?
A look of horror was etched across his face.
Es una puerta de entrada al infierno. Get me the fuck out of this agujero.
Bill wasn't fluent in Spanish, but he understood the words gateway and hell.
I told your ass we shouldn't have come here. I know, man. You were right.
A grimace of terror came over Gabriel.
Oh my God! Something's grabbing my legs! Please get me out!
To Bill's horror, as he pulled on Gabriel's arms, something kept jerking him back into the hole.
I'm trying, but something keeps pulling you back in.
No, man! Please!
Suddenly, Gabriel's arms jerked loose from Bill's grip, and he could hear him screaming as he plunged into the darkness. As he stood petrified, gazing down into the hole, he watched Gabriel's flashlight tumble through the darkness, getting fainter as it descended deeper into a dark abyss. A smoky abyss filled with the sounds of people screaming in agony. When he turned to run, something struck him in the head. As his vision faded to darkness, the last thing he saw was an old man standing over him with a shovel. Retribution. Gabriel awoke with a splitting headache. When he sat up, he noticed an oil-burning lantern hanging in a nearby tree. The faint light illuminated several tombstones and a large pile of dirt next to a hole in the ground. Then he observed barbed wire secured his wrist behind his back. A few feet away sat Bill with a horrified expression.
What the fuck is going on, man? Why are we tied up?
Bill remained silent as he nodded. When Gabriel looked, he observed an old man sitting on a tombstone smoking a cigarette. The man appeared to be in his early 80s. He wore denim blue jeans, a beige long-sleeve shirt, and an old black cowboy hat. Long gray hair cascaded down to his shoulders. The skin on his face appeared leathery and wrinkled, and his dark, pensive eyes sat back in their sockets. Uncertainty swept over Gabriel. Who are you? I'm the grave digger. Why am I tied up? Because the hour of retribution is upon you. I don't know what the fuck that means, cabron, but you better let me go before you get hurt. The old man sauntered over to him with a scythe. The tool incorporated a long S-shaped handle made of wood, 2 offset handles, and a long curved steel blade. Your days of terrorizing folks are over. Gabriel scrutinized the tool. Go easy, vato. You can have the vases. They're just outside the gate next to a tree. I couldn't care less about the vases. They were just a way to get you and your buddy here. A grimace of terror came over Bill. Are you Ben Hamilton? You already know the answer to that. Bill peered at Gabriel. I told you we were being lured here. Now you have condemned us to hell. This dude is just some old senile fucker who likes to play juegos. You keep telling yourself that, asshole. Bill redirected his attention to Ben. What are you going to do to us, sir? He nodded toward Gabriel. His soul will suffer an eternity for being a rapist and murderer. As for you, you'll pay for your transgressions in a more suitable manner. What does that mean? Are you gonna call the cops or something? No. We have a different type of justice around here. He scrutinized the scythe. Are you gonna kill us? I can't kill what is already dead. A confused expression came over him. But we're not dead. Sure you are. You died of a heart attack about an hour ago. And you shot your partner in the brain pan. That can't be possible. I'm sitting here talking to you. Dead folks around here talk all the time. Am I a ghost or something? More like a something, as you put it. What does that mean? I have this unique ability where I can keep the soul trapped in the body after death. Gabriel chuckled sarcastically. Estás jodido loco, hombre. I'll show you something fucking crazy. Ben stuck the blade of the scythe behind Gabriel's neck and pulled. Get your ass up, dipshit. Gabriel could feel the blade cutting into the back of his neck. Hold up, gilipollas. I can't move. My arms are tied up. Yeah, but your legs ain't fucking broke. When he detected the blade scraping on his spine, he quickly scrambled to his feet. Go easy, dude. You're gonna cut off my fucking head. Ben forced him to the edge of the hole, then removed the blade from his neck. Stand there and shut the fuck up, pendejo. He retrieved the lantern hanging from the tree and held it over the hole, illuminating a dark-stained coffin sitting at the bottom. Why are you showing me this, man? Ben moved the light to a tombstone next to the hole. Does this ring a bell? Gabriel recognized the name engraved on the headstone. Emma Sue Hawkins, the 25-year-old school teacher he raped and murdered. No, man. I don't know this bitch. Ben eyed Bill as he sat terrified. Did you know your buddy here raped and murdered this young woman 3 years ago? then left her body in the woods to rot like a piece of garbage.
I didn't know anything about that, sir. Please don't punish me because of what he did.
You're not. But you are gonna be punished for being a thief and a burden to society. When Ben moved his hand across the grave, Gabriel noticed the coffin began to shudder as smoke escaped from around the edges of the lid.
Is this some kind of prank?
A moment later, the lid swung open, revealing Emma's decayed corpse lying in the coffin. Gabriel noticed she wore a black dress with long sleeves. Her gaunt face exhibited patches of rotted skin, and he could see her long fingernails as her hands crisscrossed on her chest. When he observed the stitched gash running across her neck where he had slit her throat, his face contorted into a mask of horror.
Why in the fuck are you showing me this?
It's your eternal damnation. Suddenly, Emma's eyes popped open wide. Gabriel stumbled backwards as a wave of terror washed over him.
What the fuck?
She sat up, then slowly raised her head until she made eye contact with him. A petrifying sensation of dread completely overtook Gabriel's mind.
What the hell, man?
He gazed at Ben with a look of consternation.
Are you some kind of brewer?
Emma leapt from the casket and tackled Gabriel. As he lay on his back, she sat on his chest and began wildly punching him in the face with alternating fists. With his hands tied behind his back, he couldn't defend himself or fight back. To his horror, she ripped open the front of his shirt and began dragging her sharp nails from the top of his chest down to his lower abdomen, cutting 8 deep gashes into his flesh. As he wailed in agony, she jerked off his pants and boxers, then sat on his thighs facing him with her knees on each side of his hips. When Gabriel caught his composure, he raised his head and noticed her bare waist.
Get the fuck off of me!
She remained silent as she peered back at him with hollow eyes.
What the fuck are you doing, you crazy bitch?
When she didn't respond, he glared at Ben as he sat on a tombstone smoking a cigarette.
What the hell did you do, man? Is she some kind of demon or something?
Since you violated Ms. Hawkins and robbed her of her life, I've returned her to her body so she can avenge herself.
No way, man. This can't be happening. This must be some kind of trick.
Emma moved her hands close to Gabriel's crotch. Then Brazilian wandering spiders came crawling out of her shirt sleeves. Large and hairy, these spiders are aggressive and produce a potent neurotoxin. Their bite is extremely painful, and because their venom boosts nitric oxide, a chemical that increases blood pressure. The effects can cause a long and painful erection in men. Possessing arachnophobia, a wave of terror came over Gabriel as the spiders covered his genitals.
Oh my God! Please get them off me!
To his horror, the spiders sank their fangs into his penis, balls, and surrounding tissue, and began injecting him with their venom. Gabriel wailed at the top of his lungs as an unbearable pain radiated from his lower torso. Gabriel moaned in agony as the spiders crawled back into Emma's shirt, and as his penis began to swell from his body's reaction to the neurotoxin, she rose to her feet, then stood over his head. A wave of disgust came over him as he stared up at her maggot-covered crotch. Then, to his revulsion, she plopped down on his face and began grinding her maggot-infested pussy against his mouth. He thrashed around and screamed as she smashed the larva into a slimy residue all over his face. When his penis became fully erect, she slid down to his waist and shoved his dick inside her. Even though he produced an erection, it wasn't from lust, but from neurotoxin, and as she rode him, an excruciating pain throbbed from his genitals. Suffering more agony than he had ever experienced before, she leaned forward, and as she French kissed him, maggots, worms, decayed leaves, dirt, and putrefied liquids filled his mouth. As she rode and kissed him, rotted skin and leaking body fluids covered his body. Gabriel finally broke loose from her mouth and wailed.
Please stop! I'm sorry for what I did to you! Please have mercy!
She sat up and growled in an eerie voice.
And now you will be violated for an eternity.
To his horror, she grabbed his erect penis, dragged him over to her grave by his manhood, then threw him into the hole. As he lay on his back in her coffin, she leapt on top of him. Then the lid slammed closed. Horror-stricken by the bizarre event, Bill could hear Gabriel screaming as Ben casually shoveled dirt back into the hole while a cigarette hung from his lips.
Oh my God. Please, don't do that to me. I'm begging you.
You have a different punishment. Since you're a thief and a burden to society, you'll serve your penance as a caretaker over this graveyard for an eternity. The next morning, Ben used an old tractor with a front end loader and placed a large bronze statue of a guardian angel in the center of the property. Having molten bronze poured onto his body, disintegrating his outer flesh, Bill couldn't fathom how he was still alive as he gazed through the eyes of the statue, suffering in complete agony. The thought of suffering for an eternity in a bronze tomb horrified him. And that was Damnation by author Wade H. Garrett. A good reminder that if you ain't for scraps in life, that's the best you're going to get. Also, a good reminder to head on over to Amazon or Audible.com and pick up The Gravedigger, the novel this story is spun off from, also narrated by yours truly. That's 9.5 hours of unbridled horror, well worth the price of admission. And remember, when you buy a copy, you're helping out old Drew Blood tremendously. Have you bought it yet? Well, damn. Well, here's a little taste for all you tentative folks. Again, from Wade H. Garrett's brand new audiobook, The Gravedigger, I give you Chapter 16, The Mausoleum Party. Assuming Bobby and Skeeter were lying about the party at the cemetery, Slater drove to the park first. When he didn't locate Bobby, he headed to Skeeter's house, finding no one there as well. Next, he checked out several of Bobby and Skeeter's hangouts with the same result. From there, he decided to head to the cemetery. When he arrived, he found the gates wide open, so he drove into the property. After navigating some of the winding gravel roads, he finally saw a dimly lit light. In fact, it was the only light visible. The cemetery held an uncanny darkness, even to the point it seemed to absorb most of the light from his headlights. As he approached the source of the light, he found it coming from an old rock building, but there was only one vehicle parked outside, a 1985 Ford Ranger. Thinking Bobby lied, he texted, "I'm here, but there is no party, you fucking liar." Bobby responded, "Yes, there is. We're in the old Hamilton Mausoleum." "Doesn't look like a party to me. There's only one truck here." That's Skeeter's. Everyone else is coming later. Relieved that Bobby and Skeeter were the only two at the party, eliminating witnesses, he checked the revolver to ensure it was loaded, then headed on foot toward the building. Once inside, he found the source of the light, an old oil-burning lantern sitting on a concrete crypt. Finding the structure empty, he started to leave until the faint sound of an organ caught his attention. The music led him to another crypt that was slid over, revealing a staircase that entered a lower level. Fueled by the thirst for retaliation, he grabbed a lantern and headed down the stairs with his revolver in hand. The walls and steps of the stairwell started out as cement. Then about 10 feet down, they changed to solid white rock that was hand-carved out of the natural earth, indicating the ground below the cemetery had a thick layer of black dirt before changing to a solid layer of limestone. As he descended deeper into the earth, the temperature became cooler with each step, and a stale odor filled the air. At the bottom, he found a large chamber with a high ceiling carved out of the same natural limestone with a network of passages that appeared to be part of a cave system. Numerous oil-burning, wall-mounted lanterns illuminated the inside, revealing the age of the chamber to be very old. A greenish and brown patina stained the limestone walls, floor, and ceiling, and spiderwebs clung to every surface. 10 large crypts sat on the floor in a row, and numerous recessed tombs with wooden coffins lined the rear wall. On the wall to his left, there were several smaller rooms. The front of the rooms incorporated steel bars with a door, resembling prison cells. On the wall to his right, someone wearing a plague doctor's mask sat at an antique pipe organ, filling the chamber with creepy macabre music, and the smell of death, an ancient death, engulfed the air. Bewilderment washed over Slater as he gazed into what appeared to be a catacomb from another time period, something he never expected to find. When his eyes traveled to the far side of the chamber, he saw Bobby and Skeeter crouching in the shadows. Still raging over his mother's desecration, he shouted over the creepy music as he marched into the chamber.
"I see you fuckers hiding in the dark!"
When he approached them with the lantern, a conglomeration of emotions swept over him, ranging from confusion to apprehension. Instead of Bobby and Skeeter crouching down, the lantern illuminated 2 midgets wearing matching old-fashioned clothing indicative to the 1800s. Black double-breasted tailcoat, white shirt, brown notched collar vest, black trousers, stovepipe boots, and a wool John Bull hat. Their clothing, filthy and stained with dirt, exhibited severe deterioration, frayed edges and covered in holes. The men's faces were drawn and gaunt, revealing their bone structure, and darkened skin encompassed their sunken hollow eyes, giving them the appearance of the undead. Stunned by their appearance, Slater didn't know how to respond at first as he hid his revolver behind his back. Then the notion of a costume party crossed his mind. Still taken back by the realism of their costumes and makeup, he politely asked,
I'm looking for Bobby and Skeeter. Have you seen them?"
Standing motionless, they gazed back with empty expressions for a moment. Then one man slowly raised his arm and pointed. Slater looked in the direction he indicated.
"Where are they at? I don't see them."
The other man pointed in the same direction. About 20 feet away, 2 wooden coffins were leaning upright against a wall.
"All I see are 2 caskets."
The men lowered their arms. Slater mulled it over for a moment, then concluded Bobby and Slater must be hiding from him in the coffins.
"So they're fucking hiding from me. Thanks for the intel, boys."
He strolled over to the caskets, also known as toe pinchers or vampire coffins, since they incorporated 6 sides and were more narrow at the head and toes than at the shoulders. He knocked on the first one with the end of his revolver.
"I know you're in there, fucker, so come on out."
No one responded. All right, you fucking prick. Then I'll drag your ass out of there myself. He tried to open the lid of the first coffin, but it didn't budge. Then he noticed a viewing window installed on the upper portion of the lid. When he shined the light from the lantern into the coffin, something lunged at the window, striking the glass while making a loud thump. Startled, Slater stumbled backwards. "What the fuck?" he exclaimed. Once he caught his composure, he eased back to the window and glimpsed into it. Horror overcame him when he saw Skeeter's face. His eyes were huge as saucers, conveying his fear. His mouth sewn closed with thick black thread, and an upside-down cross was burned into his forehead. With terror etched across his face, Skeeter groaned out unintelligible words through his stitched lips as he desperately tried to communicate. Taken aback, Slater stepped away as he tried to process what he observed. Being a costume party, he would expect spooky makeup, even to the degree of realism Skeeter's possessed, but his horrified expression seemed genuine. About that time, a voice emanated from the other coffin.
"Slater, is that you?"
Slater eased over to the coffin and peeked through the viewing window, finding Bobby. "Well, I knew you were hiding from me, you fucker." Anger swept over him, and as he fought at the lid trying to open it, he grumbled, "Unlock the door, asshole! You're going to pay for what you did to my mom." Bobby shoved his face close to the window and shouted,
"I didn't do that to her. I swear. Please get me out of here."
Slater paused as he eyed Bobby. "You fucking liar. You knew where she was buried."
"Please get me the fuck out of this box."
"Well, I'm not doing shit until you admit to what you did."
"They made me lie to get you here. And they're the ones that did that to your mom."
"Who are you talking about?"
"Those fucking midgets. They're not human."
"What the fuck are you talking about?" About that time, the cross in Bobby's forehead turned bright red, like molten metal, and as he wailed in agony, he ferociously thrust his body around inside the coffin. A moment later, Skeeter began violently flopping around inside his coffin. Consumed with terror, Slater stepped back as he realized something was dreadfully wrong. Focusing only on his quest for vengeance, he never considered Bobby and Skeeter were luring him into a trap. Now recognizing he made a grave mistake, and the desecration of his mother's body was to simply bait him to the cemetery, he ran for the exit. To his horror, he found the two midgets blocking the bottom of the staircase, so he sprinted to one of the cave passageways. A short way down, he came upon numerous caskets stacked off to the side of the corridor. The caskets were of every type imaginable, from wood to steel, extremely old to almost new, ornamental to plain, from toe pinchers to modern style. Some were extremely decayed, rusted, and corroded, while others were shiny and pristine. Most of the lids were open, revealing its cadaver. The bodies were in all different stages of decomposition, from looking just a few days old to a rotted pile of flesh, and in some cases only a skeletal frame remained. Each of the corpses had an upside-down cross burned into its forehead identical to the ones Bobby and Skeeter possessed, and their eyes were missing, leaving deep, shadowy cavities. As Slater ran past a group of caskets, he came upon a large number of nude corpses and body parts stacked along the floor against the walls. Their skin looked preserved, like wax figures. As he moved along, he observed complete bodies, torsos without limbs or heads, severed arms and legs, and decapitated heads grouped in individual piles. Some of the corpses showed signs of mutilation and torture, while others had grotesque body modifications, including its eyes and mouths stitched closed. Several corpses were hanging upside down on large wooden crosses that leaned against a wall, and numerous steel cages and medieval-style torture contraptions lined the floor with its entrapped victims. There were corpses that incorporated different skin-colored extremities harvested from multiple races, and they were attached with thick black thread or rusted wire. There were even corpses sewn to one another, and at their stitches the skin ravaged and torn, indicating they were alive when joined together. Same as the cadavers in the caskets, each of the corpses incorporated an upside-down cross on its forehead, and their eyes were missing. Further into the passageway, Slater began to see corpses fully dressed and propped into standing, sitting, squatting, fighting, and other anatomically correct positions. And each one possessed a cross on their forehead and empty eye sockets. Some of the corpses were dressed in Western clothes indicative of the 1800s, and a handful of them even wore cowboy hats, boots, and ammunition belts equipped with a holster and a revolver. There were Native Americans dressed in traditional clothing ranging from a breechcloth to complete buckskin clothing, deerskin leggings to full ceremonial attire including a war bonnet. The Indians were from different time periods and tribes, and some held various items from bows, spears, tomahawks, and rifles, and some donned tattoos, war paint, and headdresses. Next, Slater saw a large group of corpses wearing old prison uniforms with the name of the prison and inmate numbers still printed on the fabric. Once he passed the prisoners, he came upon hundreds of corpses in all sorts of apparel from all time periods, and they too possessed upside-down crosses and empty eye sockets. It was like a wax museum of horror. As he traveled further, he came upon complete skeletons, then piles of bones and skulls sorted in individual piles. Next, he saw two-wheeled carts lined up along the wall, similar to the hay carriages from the 1800s. Their entire construction, including the wheels, were made of wood. Mutilated bodies and body parts were piled on the carts, perhaps waiting to be sorted. As Slater passed each morbid group, random thoughts raced through his mind, such as,
"Oh my God, it's only getting worse. What the fuck have I stumbled into? Oh, fuck, this is bad. What kind of psycho did this? Am I in hell?"
Finally, Slater came to the end of the passageway, finding a large room filled with everyday furniture and fully dressed corpses that appeared to be preserved. But this group didn't possess the upside-down crosses. Their eyes were intact, nor did the environment emit an unpleasant atmosphere like in the passageway. Soft, soothing music resonated out as the warm glow of the wall-mounted lanterns gave the room a nice ambience. The dead bodies were positioned in normal activities, such as sitting on a couch watching TV, at a computer desk typing on a keyboard, doing pottery, crocheting, knitting, smoking cigars, playing board games, sitting around the kitchen table partaking in a feast, sleeping in bed, playing video games, dancing, playing tennis, golf, and other sports. And several corpses donned football gear and were positioned in a formation. There were even corpses dressed as rock stars holding guitars and other instruments. Everyone seemed happy and participating in what they enjoyed in life the most. In the center of the room, movement caught Slater's eye. Ben and another man, donning a U.S. Marine's dress blue uniform, were sitting at a card table playing chess. Slater froze in his tracks as he exclaimed,
"Oh, shit!"
Ben glanced over.
"I'm glad to see you made it."
Stunned and not sure if he should bolt, he stood steadfast as he eyed Ben cautiously.
"Sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you and your friend."
Ben moved the chess piece.
"You're not."
Slater eyed the other man and started to speak until he noticed he was a corpse. A gut-wrenching feeling swept over him, realizing Ben was responsible for all the atrocities that surrounded him.
"In fact, I've been waiting for you."
Horrified, Slater could barely speak.
"Who are you?" "I'm the grave digger."
All the horror stories he heard about Ben flashed through his mind.
"Are you real?" "No, you're talking to a ghost, dumbass."
Ignoring Ben's sarcastic reply and pondering on the horrific sight he passed in the passageway, he muttered, "Are you going to kill me?"
What do you think I should do with you?
Slater wanted to run, but his legs were frozen with fear.
What do you mean? Don't play dumb with me, boy. You know why you're here.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Suddenly, the sound of feet shuffling behind him prompted Slater to look over his shoulder. Is someone else here?
There's a lot of folks hanging around, but they're not of your concern.
Out of the corner of his eye, Slater thought he saw the Marine move a chess piece. He quickly jerked his head back toward the card table and examined the corpse, noting his skeletal frame, rotted flesh, and glazed-over eyes.
Did that army dude just move his arm? Mr. Arnold is a decorated Marine. Show some respect.
Oh, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. My mind is just playing tricks on me. Sorry.
What are you talking about?
I thought I saw him move his arm.
You saw correctly.
There's no way. He's dead.
How is he gonna play chess if he don't move his own pieces?
Slater stood dumbfounded for a moment. You're just screwing with me.
If you say so.
Slater still didn't comprehend the magnitude of his situation, even after witnessing all the bizarre and horrifying things, such as his mother's corpse moving on its own while speaking to him, Bobby's cross that appeared on his forehead right in front of him, the two midgets in the main chamber, the ghastly exhibit in the passageway, and now the room filled with preserved bodies. His mind couldn't fathom this was the work of something supernatural. For him, there must be a simple explanation for it all. He even contemplated Bobby and Skeeter were playing a prank on him.
Are you some kind of magician? Someone gave me a magic starter kit years ago, but never really got into it.
Well, this is a pretty elaborate show you're putting on, so I wouldn't say you never got into it. And what's the deal with all the fake corpses out in the hallway? Are you turning this into a haunted house or something? Ben moved his queen.
I think of it more as a sanctuary.
What is that?
Well, all these folks in here wanted my help. Now they're at peace.
Folks? You talking about these props?
I wouldn't refer to them as props. They might take offense to that.
Thinking the old man was part of a prank, Slater played along. What did you help them with?
Retribution.
Is that why you brought me here? You're gonna revenge me?
You're on the other end of the spectrum, and will be joining the ones in the passageway.
What the fuck does that mean?
You find out in due time.
Thinking Ben was trying to scare him, Slater grinned. You sure went all out on this prank.
If you say so.
Suddenly, the Marine moved the chess piece as a ghostly voice echoed out.
Checkmate.
Ben leaned back in his chair as he pumped his fists.
Damn it. That's like 20 in a row.
Slater snickered. That's some good animation. You almost had me fooled with this hoax. Ben took a deep breath, then glared at Slater.
Playtime is over. And what gave you the idea this is a ruse?
I'm not an idiot. It's obvious Bobby and Skeeter put you up to this. Slater eyed the Marine. And look, you can tell the Army dude is fake as shit. You didn't even do a good job making him.
I told you to show some damn respect, boy.
Now behaving in a cocky manner, Slater approached the Marine after setting the lantern on the card table. I'm not falling for your trickery. When he clutched the corpse's head, it snapped off at its neck. Ben's eyes narrowed.
You dumbass. Look what you did to Mr. Arnold.
Slater's arrogant facial expression morphed into confusion when he realized the head appeared to be authentic.
Oh, shit.
Ben rose from his chair.
Oh, shit is right, boy. And you are gonna pay for that.
Suddenly, the head opened its mouth and wailed out an ear-piercing scream. Horrified, Slater threw the head at Ben, grabbed the lantern, then sprinted out of the room. Now realizing it wasn't a hoax, but a supernatural realm he never knew existed, a petrifying sensation of terror completely overtook him as he raced down the passageway. As he passed the corpses, body parts, skeletons, and caskets, the gravity of his situation sank in. Knowing if he got caught, his fate would be doomed. When he approached the two coffins containing Bobby and Skeeter, the hair on his neck rose as ear-piercing screams roared out, a sound you'd only expect to hear emanating from hell itself. Eyeing the exit, he saw the two midgets still standing guard at the bottom of the staircase. Without missing a step, he threw the lantern at the two men, engulfing them in flames. The distraction worked as he sprinted past them and headed up the stairs.
Chilling tales for dark nights.